I'm afraid your father will have to remain in his coma for several more months. We'll be feeding him pure meat through a tube just like you asked. In the meantime, let's go party all over Europe.
When people think of happiness or pursuing happiness, the first thing they think of is, well, it's a pretty selfish desire. I want to be happy for me. I mean, after all, who wants to be unhappy? But I'm here to tell you that, in fact, happiness is far, far, far more than a selfish desire. It's actually a moral obligation. Whether or not you're happy, and certainly whether or not you act happy, is a very, very altruistic endeavor. Yes, indeed, we have a moral obligation. Happy people make the world better. Unhappy people tend to make the world worse.
There's a scene in Pinocchio where Geppetto wishes on a star, right? And what it means is he lifts up his eyes beyond the horizon to something transcendent. And so he lifts his eyes up above his daily concerns and he says, what I want more than anything else is that my creation will become a genuine individual, right? It's a heroic gesture because it's so unlikely, and that catalyzes the puppet's transformation into a real being, and we start as puppets. And so the trick is to get rid of your goddamn strings.
I want to be like you, Mr. Peterson. Please tell me how to live.
I want to get into this because this is I think this is a fascinating thing with you personally. Your diet. You're on this carnivore diet now. This is what I mean. What's fascinating to me is I haven't heard any negative stories about people doing this.
Well, I have a negative story.
Okay.
Okay. When we restricted our diet and then ate something we weren't supposed to, the reaction was absolutely catastrophic.
What did you do? What did you switch to?
Well, the worst response, we had some apple cider that had sulfites in it, and that was really not good. Like, I was done for a month.
You were done for a month?
Oh, yeah. It took me out for a month. It was awful.
Apple cider? Like, what was it
doing?
Sulfites in it. What was it doing to you?
Oh, it produced an overwhelming sense of impending doom.
Come on over here. We are intrinsically tied to the president. He's with us. He's for us. If you love birds, you'd never want to walk under a windmill because it's a very sad, sad sight.
Jesus said, take this cup. This is my blood of the new covenant.
I said certified freak 7 days a week. Wet ass B-word. Make that pull out game week.
Fear is a fact. There's no God over me. There's no policeman over me. There's no one over me. I am God.
Fucking cider.
Oh, I didn't sleep that month. I didn't sleep for 25 days. I didn't sleep at all.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, not
and
good.
And this is from fucking cider. From cider.
That's what we thought. Yeah. I mean, look, again, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
You need to wake up, Dr. Peterson. My master, please wake up for us. We are so lost without you.
"12 more rules. What is natural must be right. Eat your meat and worship might. Stand up straight, listen carefully, accept your place within the hierarchy."
Pinocchio. My boy. My brave little boy.
Clean your room, pray to God, obey your lords with 12 new rules.
Pinocchio! Oh, Pinocchio!
Think of all the cash, think of all the suits. Don't you think the world needs 12 more rules?
You watch what you say, and you find out
What is
some
natural
things you
must
say
be
make you come
right.
apart,
Eat your
make you
meat
fall
and
apart.
worship
It's a
might.
feeling of chaotic
Stand up
weakness and
straight,
dissolution.
listen
It's a
carefully,
sense of
accept
self-betrayal.
your place
And then
within
if
the
you
hierarchy.
tell the truth, that pulls you together and strengthens you.
12 more rules. 12 more rules. 12 more rules.
You're dead, Pinocchio.
My name is Ben Burgess, and this is Give Them an Argument. What we just watched, that is the work of the good people at Amon Animations. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but that's an amazing video. Had to start that way for this episode because this is going to be a special, more or less all Jordan Peterson episode. Because Peterson is coming out with his new book, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, in a couple of days. And so in just a moment, I am going to be joined by the three people who co-wrote this book with me. They wrote most of it. I wrote a chapter. Myth and Mayhem, a leftist critique of Jordan Peterson. Introduction by Slavoj Žižek, but the people who actually wrote it, who are going to be here in a second, are Conrad Hamilton, Matt McManus, and Marion Trejo. Usually we don't bring on guests until about the 8 o'clock mark, but since Conrad is in Paris, where it is already like 1:43 in the morning, we are going to hurry him on in just a minute, and then we will. And then we'll do the whole main segment of the show, and we have some stuff we normally would have done at the beginning that we'll do then. We're starting a new segment called This Week in Biden, which we'll do sort of an informal version of tonight. And David Griskin is still on vacation, so we're not having Outlaws and Revolutionaries, but Vic Viana is going to do a substitute music segment tonight. Going to talk about Pink Floyd. That should be good. But I want to bring on Conrad, Matt, and Marion in just a second, but there are a couple things I do have to real quickly plug first. The first one is that since this is March 1st in exactly 2 months, on May Day, my new book comes out from Zero Books, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left. You can pre-order that from a bunch of places, but the one that I'd recommend is Red Emma's, which is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore. So that's redemmas.org, and then just look it up there. And then the second thing is that there is going to be, so Michael Albert, people might remember when he was on the show a month or two ago. I don't know, time is a flat circle, it all blurs together. But he runs this School for Social and Cultural Change, which does 8-week online classes, and it's for the masses. So it's not like college tuition where you have to mortgage your house to go. It's a very very modestly priced and sliding scale and all that good stuff. So there are a bunch of people, there are a bunch of interesting people like Noam Chomsky who are going to be teaching classes there, 8-week online classes in April and May. I am going to be doing one called Logic for Left-Wing Debaters and Activists. So that is again starting in April, but it's officially open for enrollment today. So it's an 8-week course, so covers a lot of stuff that's in the first book, covers some stuff that's going to be in the new book, covers some stuff that's not in either one, but that's really interesting, like the analytic Marxism of G.A. Cohen. So that's SSCC, School of Social and Cultural Change.teachable.com. if you want to sign up for that course, or go check out any of the other courses there that are being taught by other people this April and May. Final thing before I bring everybody on, the patron bonus episode for this week, which is so episode 37, I believe, is going to, which drops as always for patrons on Thursday. We're trying to do more sort of pure philosophy episodes, so this one is going to be a beginner's guide to Kant with Matt McManus, who you'll see in a second, Russ Sabriglia, and then Ryan Lake. So I think this is going to be Beginner's Guide to Kant Part 1, actually, because there's a lot to cover there, and we're only going to have about an hour for this. So we'll talk about all that again later, but right now I want to get straight to the Jordan Peterson trigger warning. There is going to be a lot of Jordan Peterson that you're going to be exposed to tonight, in clips. So, you were warned. All right. So we have Matt McManus, Conrad Hamilton, and Marion Trejo, the three people who between them wrote the bulk of Myth and Mayhem, a leftist critique of Jordan Peterson. So we're going to start up the subjecting people to clips of Peterson pretty quickly. But before I further traumatize everybody with all of that, I want to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. So, Matt.
Yeah. So I am a professor of politics at Whitman College. I'm also one of the authors of Myth and Mayhem. And a lot of the other stuff that I do is writing on postmodern conservatism. You can see my book for Zero on that topic. And on occasion, I also contribute things to Jacobin, Marion West, and a few other outlets, usually on hot topics of the day. But every now and then, I also do like to delve into pure philosophy and pure theory, including tomorrow when we're going to be talking about Kant. So that's kind of my shtick.
Sounds good. Conrad.
Hi, I'm Conrad Hamilton. I'm Canadian, but I live in Paris now, where I'm completing my PhD, which deals with the way that categories of social agency in the work of Marx are issue, in a sense, from economic structures or the form of value. But can't really get it out now. But I'm one of the co-authors of obviously Myth and Mayhem. My section focused broadly on sort of Peterson's critiques of postmodern neo-Marxism, exploring the legitimacy of those critiques. And like Matt, I write for a number of different outlets. So I've contributed to Marion West, Ario. I think hopefully our first article will be coming out on Zizek in Jacobin shortly. So, and this is my second appearance on Ben's show, which I enjoy a great deal. So,
all right, thanks, Conrad. Marion.
Hi everyone, I'm Marion. I'm married to Matt, and very important part. No, I'm Mexican, currently living in Toronto. I used to be a professor back there in Mexico of politics. I was like a professor for undergrads for around like 6 years. And then I decided to go back to school and complete like my PhD. So now I'm like a PhD student, and I'm working, or I hope to work a thesis on kind of a political economy of fear from kind of like a Marxist tradition. So that's
cool.
A little bit of
Nice. All right. Well, let's get right to the subjecting everybody's psyches to these clips. And yes, the fact that I was able to abuse my power as a boss to force Forrest to watch so much Jordan Peterson over the course of the last week to harvest these clips is probably an argument against capitalism in itself. But let's watch this first one. It's kind of
organization is the rule among animals that live somewhat socially, and even those who don't, that occupy the same geographical territory. There has to be some way of organizing access to relatively scarce resources that doesn't result in chronic combat. Because chronic combat, well, look, you're Ren A and you're Ren B, and you decide to have it out, so you peck yourselves half to death, and you're Ren C, and so you got a little bit more patience. You just wait until those two Rens beat each other to death, and then you move in. It's like it's a stupid solution. It doesn't even work for Rens, let alone people. And so, you know, the Wrens announce their prowess, and they do that with the quality of their song and their displays, and they indicate to one another who shouldn't be messed with, and then there's a minimum of combat. And you could make a pretty good case that that's power, that's power. But like, it's not like Wrens get together and build like Wren apartment houses and then go out on collective worm hunt insects, I guess, collective insect hunting expeditions and bring them all back and distribute them, and, or make insect farms so that there's more insects for all the Wrens. They haven't got that far, you know. They're competing in a zero-sum game. And that isn't what human beings do. We figured out how to not have zero-sum games a very, very long time ago. And it turns out that if the game you're playing isn't zero-sum, right, which means that there's only a finite number of resources and everybody has to fight to the death for them, and some are going to get the lion's share and others are going to starve. If you're not playing a zero-sum game, then you can learn to cooperate and compete in an intelligent and civilized manner, and all of a sudden, there's more than enough for everyone. Now, still, some people are going to have more than others, you know, but there's nothing. How are you going to stop that? And do you want to? Like, do you want to only know what, do you want to only be allowed to know what everyone else knows? You don't get to know anything that anyone else knows, because it's got to be equal. You want everyone to be exactly the same amount of attractive, you know, and if you averaged attractiveness overall and you only allowed each person to be as attractive as the average person, there'd be not much attractiveness left in the world. And it seems to me that that would be quite the loss, you know. And strength, you're not allowed to have any additional strength or ambition or talent or let's say athletic ability. It's like, or artistic ability. I mean, aren't we kind of happy that there's massive inequality in the distribution of talent? I know it's harsh and hard, but you can't expect everybody to have every talent that there is, and it would be a hell of a sacrifice if no one got to have any talent, because it wouldn't be fair. And so I don't get the whole equality of outcome thing. It isn't going to work. There aren't that many geniuses, you know. We want to exploit the geniuses and get them to work for us. And if the price is that somebody has more than you do of something, well, suck it up, for Christ's sake. Well, Jesus, seriously, man. It's like, look, how much more do you have than most people have? You know, you need to make $30,000 a year to be in the top 1% of the socioeconomic distribution worldwide. You know, you always hear about the 1%. Right, the evil 1%. And they churn, by the way, because it's not the same people all the time. It's like all of you here are in the evil 1%, and you think, well, that's not very fair, because I was really only talking about within my country. Well, that's convenient for you, you know. It makes it really, really convenient argument for you. It's like, well, all those other people, those foreigners, they don't count. If they're poor, who the hell cares? It's the Australians that matter. You know, and so no, that's a non-starter. You know, and by historical standards, you're doing a hell of a lot better than the top 1%. I can tell you that. I read a nice article by a coalition called Human Progress the other day, and they were comparing the typical middle-class person who lives now with Rockefellers in the 1919s, and say, well, would you rather be a middle-class person now or Nelson Rockefeller in 1919? And the answer seemed pretty damn clear that, well, you know, if you were Nelson Rockefeller, then you would have been richer than anyone else. And there's something to be said for that status, right? Because people do like to have more than others. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it is one of the things that we like. And so you'd have that. You'd be richer than everyone else. But there'd be all sorts of things that you have that now that Nelson Rockefeller wouldn't have had a hope of purchasing. like the antibiotics that he would have needed to stop his son from dying, for example, you know, just as a start. And so I think this complaint about inequality, look, no one likes inequality exactly. You walk down the street, this is why I always get a kick out of people who protest, I'm against poverty. It's like, really? You're against poverty, and you think that's a unique enough attribute so that it was worth your time to make a sign that said that you were against poverty and show other people. It's like, I've never met anyone that was for poverty. You know, you walk down the street with someone who's pretty well off, you know, and they've got 1920s spats on and a bowler, and they're feeling pretty damn rich, and a Stockster certificate sticking out of their back pocket, and, you know, there's a homeless person there, and they give them a good kick, and they say, the more poverty, the better. It's like, no. You know, when people walk down the street and you see homeless people, and they're often, homelessness is a complex problem. Like, you think, well, homeless people are poor. It's like, yeah, man. That's like one problem they have out of 50. And like, I've worked with poor people, you know, in my clinical practice, and poor in multiple dimensions. And many of them, you gave them money, they were just done. Especially if they were like alcoholics and cocaine addicts. As long as they were broke, they had some hope of living through the next month. But as soon as their unemployment check showed up, man, they were face down in the ditch 3 days later, right? Nothing but cocaine and alcohol with all their idiot friends for 3 days. And then they'd show up back in my practice saying, you know, God, I relapsed again. I said, well, what happened? Well, my money came in. It's like, yeah, money's really going to do you a hell of a lot of good. It just kill you faster than poverty. Now, not that there's anything good about poverty, but it's not like these are simple problems. You walk down the street and you see someone who's been an alcoholic for 20 years, and maybe they're addicted to methamphetamines as well, or maybe they're schizophrenic. It's like, it isn't unequal distribution of monetary resources that is the primary cause for that problem, and it isn't going to be some sort of straightforward redistribution that's going to fix it, because it's way more complicated than that.
Hi, everyone. As some of you may know, but others will not, it's been a long while since I put up any new content on this YouTube channel. I've been suffering from impaired health, severely impaired health, as a consequence of benzodiazepine use for anxiety, or more accurately, from a combination of using that medication and then ceasing its use once I realized it was dangerous. That's put me in and out of hospitals for much of the last year in Connecticut, in the United States, in Toronto, in Canada, in Moscow, in Russia, and in Belgrade, Serbia, as my family searched for specialists who could aid me in the severe post-use withdrawal and neurological damage-related consequences of both the benzodiazepine use and its cessation. I started taking it in 2016, 2017, early 2017, according to the prescribed recommendations, and really never give it a second thought. That was a mistake, to say the least.
Here's another representation. This is a cool one. I've got a couple of them here that are really cool. This is from China. So this is Fuxi and Nuwa. I think I've got that right. But I just love that representation. It's so insanely cool, this representation. So you see the sort of the primary mother and father of humanity emerging from this underlying snake-like entity with its tails tangled together. I think that's I really do believe this, although it's very complicated to explain why. I really believe that's a representation of DNA. So, and that representation, that entwined double helix, that is everywhere. You can see it in Australian Aboriginal art, and I'm using the Australians as an example because they were isolated in Australia for like 50,000 years. They're the most archaic people that were ever discovered. And they have clear representations of these double helix structures in their art. So, and those are the two giant serpents out of which the world is made, roughly speaking. It's the same thing, you see that in the staff of Asclepius, which is the healing symbol that physicians use, although usually that's only one snake, but sometimes it's two. So that's a Chinese representation. And then there's this. That's the Egyptian representation. We talked about the Egyptian story the other day, right? We talked about Isis and Osiris.
Yeah, so that's a good cross section of what Peterson has been up to in over the course of the last few years. If people are watching this on YouTube, there's a moment that you can see me. I was muted, but started cracking up at a sort of odd and inappropriate moment. That's because Forrest messaged me. We were on the edge of the Australian bush when the benzos started to kick in, but I think that cross section of clips, gives you both a good sense of the the very odd. Well, I mean, there's a lot going on there, but maybe we can start here, right? So that that you see the political upshot of Peterson's shtick, and and this is. I know a lot of people, kind of have the, attention span of a mosquito, and they say, well, why even talking about Jordan Peterson? Like this guy's yesterday's news, even though, Beyond Order hasn't, 12 More Rules for Life hasn't come out yet, and it comes out in 2 days, and the original 12 Rules for Life still sells like 200 trillion copies a week, slight exaggeration, but not much. Check out Amazon's lists of most read and bought books of that week, and so he's incredibly influential. I mean, even if it seems odd to us that he is, and you see the political upshot of what he's saying in the first clip when he's talking about hierarchy. He's doing this weird straw-man-y thing about how people who object to inequality are like objecting to inequality and strength or talent or physical attractiveness, or that's sort of the same question as inequality in material resources, and you see this sort of odd mystical guru way that he justifies that stance, all the stuff about animals, and then at the end there, I mean, like that's it's kind of a remarkable thing that this is like a room full of adults who he just told that the twine snake artwork, like symbolism and ancient artwork, is a representation of the double helix structure of DNA, which was not discovered until the mid 20th century, and nobody laughs. Like everybody just treats that as if he just said something. He just said something normal. So there's a lot going on here. It's the perfect panel to break it down. Matt, you want to get us started? Any thoughts?
Sure. Well, I have a lot of thoughts. I think I'm just going to focus on the first clip for now, and I just do want to say that. I do hope he gets better, and I'm happy he does seem to be doing better. Nobody should hold addiction against anyone else, and that includes Jordan Peterson, right?
We should all have the compassion towards his struggles with addiction that he so manifestly fails to have at the end of the first clip towards everybody else's struggles with addiction.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So one of the things that's emblematic of modernity, right, is the commitment in a principled way to the ideals of moral equality and freedom. And the two are fundamentally related in the sense that once you believe that people are moral equals, you think that there's something deeply wrong about using the state or imposing coercion to force someone to adopt your vision of the good life, right? And we can have debates about how these principles are supposed to be cashed out, but they've proven extremely popular and have had a long shelf life. Let's just put it that way, right? One of the things that's characterized conservative thought has been resistance to both of them, particularly the first principle of moral equality, but also the second principle around freedom, as long as freedom's not exercised in exactly the right way. And you've seen a lot of different reactionaries try to mount various different defenses of hierarchicalization, stratification, and authoritarianism. Some of those are quite innovative, but they usually tend to take two forms, right? And this is well known. One form is mythologization, which is oddly enough usually associated with a kind of skeptical kind of reasoning, right? We can't know the universe, it's too big and too impossible to understand. Only God can fully understand it, but this is why we shouldn't question the way things are, including established hierarchies, right? The other kind of way that this is typically justified is through naturalization, as is well known, right? Which is what you also saw him do, right? In the animal kingdom, we see that bigger apes mess up smaller apes. This goes to prove that this is just the way of things. Science demonstrates it. Facts don't care about your feelings. Ergo, we're always going to have hierarchies, right? And I think that there's a certain amount of truth to some of these descriptive observations, right? I mean, sure, fair enough. You can say that there are certain hierarchies that exist in the animal kingdom. You can also say that certain kind of hierarchies are useful in human social life, right? But all of this is really straw-manning the modernist commitment to moral equality and freedom, since, of course, no one denies that you're going to need hierarchies of a certain sort, right? Parents will, in a certain sense, need to have a certain degree of control over their children. If we're playing a board game and I happen to be winning, that's not because I'm oppressing you in any way, shape, or form. It's just because we're engaging in a voluntary activity and I happen to be doing somewhat better at this. The question has always been, what kind of hierarchies can be justified, right? And this is where I think he really falls off the rails a lot, since he tends to not even really argue for, but just imply that contemporary inequality as it stands right now is somehow justifiable because either it's mythologically necessary or naturally inevitable. And I think that that's completely bogus, right? I don't see any particularly compelling reason why it is that Jeff Bezos needs to be worth $200 million. And at the same time, he has to be running a charity where people can donate for his workers because apparently they're not able to earn enough in between, using their piss jugs in order to put food on their table. Right? There's absolutely nothing that's natural, inevitable, or mythologically necessary about that.
Yeah,
right?
and I do want to just underline one thing you said before we let
200 billion, by the way, 200 billion.
200
million.
Yeah, which actually he's because his business picked up so much at the beginning of the pandemic, because everybody was using Amazon more. It's going to be several years, before he gets there, if he does. But, last summer, there were stories that came out in the business press saying that he is on track in the next several years to become the world's first trillionaire. But, for now, he has to make do with the 200 billion.
Yeah, a modest accomplishment, right? And just long story short, I just wanted to finish by saying, like all conservatives, reactionaries, those of us who are committed to the principles of modernity, freedom, and equality should try to pick holes in their argument. And I think that Peterson is a pretty decent conservative intellectual, right, as they stand. And I spent a lot of time reading these people. He's certainly not up there, I would think, with somebody like Edmund Burke or even, a darker thinker like Friedrich Nietzsche or Martin Heidegger. But this kind of mythologization, naturalistic synthesis he's put forward doesn't make a lot of coherent sense, but it has a shelf life because it appeals to a lot of people's intuitions. And one of the reasons I think it was important for us to produce the book was precisely to offer a substantial intellectual rebuttal to the kind of arguments we was put forward. Whether it's done that, I don't know, but I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, no, for sure. If I do say so myself, but I have, I did just want to underline what you said about the naturalization, mythologization, because if anybody, for anybody who's reading this, for who's listening or to this or watching it on YouTube, who hasn't read this, I think an absolutely essential book about everything that you're saying right now, Matt, that actually came out exactly the same time ours did, was Michael Brooks's Against the Web. And that's one of the big organizing themes of the book, that he talks about how, reactionaries in general, although he's talking about the intellectual dark web in particular, tend to use these two big strategies. They either naturalize or mythologize existing hierarchies. So naturalizing them, this is the Sam Harris lane, or really in a more extreme way, the Charles Murray lane.
Where much more extreme in his case.
Yeah, although Harris has somewhat defended that, but that where you say that science tells us that we have to have these hierarchies, or they can't be overcome, or whatever, and mythologizing is, I mean, it's what Marx is reacting to in the introduction to the Critique of the Philosophy of Right, when, he has that famous passage about the opium of the people, which is saying, oh, we have to have the existing social hierarchies because, the gods have ordained it, or, something like that, very different versions of that in different societies that have existed at different times. And one of the things that makes Peterson's, sort of perversely interesting as kind of early reactionary is that he just slides back and forth, like almost like, seamlessly between the two modes. He just does lots of both of these things all the time. Half the time he's appealing to science, half the time he's saying that, we need to have, we can't try to redistribute wealth because then we'll be letting the dragon of chaos in to disrupt, to disrupt the principles of order. But Marion, Conrad, thoughts?
I can jump in there. Yeah, I thought some of your comments were interesting. I mean, it occurred to me that in Peterson's talk, there was a tension when he talked about inequality between two views, right? And one of those, which is very characteristic Peterson, is the idea that these inequalities which prevail in nature. I don't even know what a wren is. I actually don't know what animal that is. So it's a bird. Okay, I'm sure it doesn't matter too much anyway. There are these inequalities which prevail in nature, but on the other hand, he said something else which is interesting. He said that, but we're not in a zero-sum game anymore, right? And what he alluded to was, society having the capacity to produce resources well in excess of what nature can provide, right? So he's talking about, the increasing of productivity and the generation of wealth, and I think it's very interesting because he already draws a connection in that talk between elusively between inequality and the capacity to go beyond the zero-sum game, right? So I think an interesting question to ask would be, why is it the case, right? That this tremendous increase in productivity, which has defined modernity and industry and so forth, why has it led to such a high degree of inequality, right? And I think what you have to say is that, yes, on one side, right, we can say that, the great achievement of capitalism is that, it's led to greater productivity than ever before. Not that that hasn't had consequences, right? Look at the environmental crisis, for example, but that the way that it's been done, right, through, essentially the exploitation of wage labor, tendentially creates greater stratifications. I think it's safe to say than comparable precedents in the natural world. But that's not a tension that's really addressed in his talk. In fact, as regards inequality in general, it's interesting, right? Because you were talking about straw manning, right? Marx says in the Paris manuscripts, he says very explicitly that, the problem with capitalism is that it doesn't permit, the expression of the virtues of individuals, right? Or it obscures them, right? Obfuscates them, right? He says, I'm ugly, but I can have the most beautiful wife, right? I'm crippled, but I have 10 servants. Now, one could argue that, Marx doesn't go far enough in associating these advantages, which he separates from the category of money, with capitalism. I mean, Pierre Bourdieu remarks, for example, that in some sense, beauty is aleatory and genetic. In another sense, you do find that characteristically, the people who are deigned to be the most attractive come from the wealthiest places. Right? Why is whiteness valorized in terms of beauty across the world? Right? So there's still some kind of connection there. But what I want to stress is just that in terms of this naturalization of inequality, which is incoherently presented, I think, in the talk we watch, if you don't have this, Peterson's whole system really falls apart.
Yeah, and I should say too, like, I think that, yeah, I mean, and that recognition of natural inequality, I mean, is like, it's not just in the early stuff, the Paris manuscripts, it goes throughout Marx's career. In the first chapter of the Critique of the Gotha program, he talks about how, in fact, one of his objections to the Lassalleans, this other faction in the German socialist movement, saying that they're everybody should equally get the full product of their labor. First, he points out that that's inconsistent, right? If it's the full product of the labor everybody puts in, then it's not equal, right? And then he says that this would actually just be a natural aristocracy because some people, work harder than others, some people are stronger than others, some people are smarter than others, and so again, it's something that I think he always has well-honed recognition of. And I would just have a quick shout out. So Peter Fraze wrote a book called Four Futures, Life After Capitalism, which was originally a Jacobin article, then was expanded into a short book. And I don't agree with Fraze about everything, but I mean, he's very good in this article, in this book, talking about this subject of hierarchies, because his position, what he says, and I think this kind of seems to be what Marx thought, is look, nobody thinks that you're going to have a society without any hierarchy of any kind, even status, right? But the kinds of, and this goes to the Marx quote that you're talking about, Conrad, the kinds of status hierarchies that we would have in an economically egalitarian society would be different and better because they wouldn't all be organized around the one central defining hierarchy of money. That you could, look, if you can't, if you can't find recognition within one status hierarchy, it's a lot easier to find it in another, in a society where you don't have one that sort of tends to envelop all the others in its gravitational orbit. But yeah, and I do want to point out, by the way, you're talking, the first part of the talk was talking about the Wrens and all that stuff, just as it's honestly, in a way, it's like the least of what's wrong with what he's saying, but it's also worth pointing out that the stuff about homeless people, sure, they're poor, but that's like one of 50 problems, whatever. And then he's kind of talking about his anecdotal impressions of homeless people he worked with as a clinical psychiatrist, clinical psychologist, but there is actually empirical work on this. Like there have been studies where there are different entities, local governments and stuff that have given homeless people a place to live and financial support for like 6 months. And the evidence seems to pretty clearly show that in fact, for most people, that is enough for them to get their life together, that they have that. So this idea, I mean, that this is just a problem with personal character, that is what he's implying, is again just doesn't seem to be borne out empirically, and it's also
we might have to ask how those social pathologies are produced in the first place.
Right.
Of course, I'm not denying that they can happen to anyone, right? But I think that there's plenty of statistical data that indicates that things like drug problems, alcohol problems are not independent, right, of social and material circumstances. So there's already a fallacy.
No, for sure, right? I mean, and there's and you can hold two thoughts in your head here, right? You can have, I mean, clearly, right, as Peterson himself shows, right, you can have these problems due to other causes without, material deprivation, but it's also a little silly to pretend that it's like a coincidence that they tend to spike at the same time as economic crashes, deindustrialization, things like that, that on a statistical level, they do tend to be caused by that. But Marion, haven't heard from you.
I was just thinking of everything that you said, and I actually agree. Like, to me, he has a very contradictory view of nature. Sometimes he says, no, as you mentioned, right, the whole lobster issue, our social organization should reflect nature on the one hand, and at some other point he believes of course, he has a whole book on maps of meaning and how important is to go cultural creations, to go beyond nature. But I was going to say that one of the things that he also fails to me to be kind of precise to is when he speaks of inequality, difference, and hierarchy, right? Because and also as a feminist, right, the whole feminist issue is just because there's a sexual difference, that shouldn't mean there should be a hierarchy there, right? Which Peterson fails to acknowledge the fact that just certain differences given by nature are not just justifiable to maintain them as a social hierarchy, right? And and as you said, I was also thinking when you were mentioning, like certain political projects don't advocate for erasing hierarchies, just the ones that, for example, are given by money. And I was just thinking precisely on the whole idea of meritocracy and how talent and the idea of talent, right? And I think Peterson he's very critical on his meritocratic view, right? It's like, oh no, like his whole problem with the quality of outcome, that it's also so misguided too, right? But his whole issue is like, oh no, we want everyone to have the same talents. It's like, no, like JP, right? Like you can have different talents, just that talent shouldn't be the only measure for your value and for the access to opportunities that you should have, right? And that's also like, okay, let's give him. Let's take for granted the fact, like, okay, talent is the measure because he loves to talk about talent, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the people that we think they are talented, they are not even that talented, right? Think about Elon Musk, right? He's not even the one behind the whole thing. Like, he wants to get to Mars, and that's his idea, right? But he's not the one actually, like, making the scientific improvements to get there, right? Like, he hires the talented people, but he keeps the money, right? So,
which is, I feel like, a distinction that there would be that somebody like Peterson would have no trouble making in the context of a different social system, like, you know, Cuba actually has like a lot of biotech, you know, that they've advanced in a lot in the last several decades. And a big part of the reason why is I think there was just a point in the 80s when, you know, Fidel Castro sort of decided that this is something that they'd be good at and that they should try to start to do. And I don't think that your Petersons or your, you know, like any of these people, these reactionaries who really valorize, you know, entrepreneurs would say, oh my God, Fidel Castro is such a genius because Cuba has these biotech developments. I think in that case, he'd be able to recognize, oh, the person making the decision, you know, is not, you know, in the lab figuring out how to implement it. Although in Elon Musk's case, even the people in the lab usually aren't very good at it. I mean, I always think he's kind of like a version of a James Bond villain who's like, but the thing that would lower him and, you know, would lower, you know, Commander Bond into the, you know, into the pool with the sharks or whatever wouldn't actually work. You know, he'd like give a press conference about how amazing it was, but then it would like stall halfway down. But you mentioned the gender stuff, and that is the next and that sort of slippage, that fallacious inference that Peterson makes, which is you know, from the existence of differences to the existence of social hierarchies based on those differences. Forrest, do we have that clip? So, because this is something I think is really central.
Which one did we end up choosing? I have him talking about the gender pay gap. I thought maybe was a good one for.
Oh, okay, yeah, let's do that one.
Okay.
So, because this is something that I think is like really central to, you know, to Peterson's, you know, to Peterson's work. Like to the point where like it almost seems sometimes like a it's like a it's almost like a shell game, right? You know, come for the sexism, you know, stay for the capitalist apologetics. But yeah, Forrest, let's watch this.
That really famous instance at the University of Toronto where this one guy, I don't even remember what his book.
Farrell.
Yes, what was his book about?
More.
Yeah, Why Men Make More.
Yeah, it was a multivariate analysis of the income disparity between men and women. He used to be a feminist activist. He decided to go look into the claim that, you know, women were making, I think at the time it was 70 cents for every dollar that men were making. He thought, well, I have daughters, I better go check this out and see, you know, do a little bit of in-depth investigating. And what he found out was that there were many reasons for the disparity. And perhaps one of them was unfair discrimination, but there were another dozen, and they seem to account for more of the disparity than the discrimination. I mean, just the fact that men take the more dangerous jobs is a huge contributor to that. And it's not trivial. You should get paid more if you're putting your limbs on the line. You know, I mean, I grew up in northern Alberta where a lot of young men dropped out of school and went and worked on the oil rigs. It's like, you go try that. Well, maybe you could do it. But, you know, the guys would lose their fingers, they'd lose their toes, it was 40 bloody below up there, and they'd be wrestling pipe in the middle of the bush.
I have a friend who does it. I have a friend who does that in northern Alberta.
Right.
It's horrific.
It is. It's tough work, man. And you're out in the bush for 2 weeks.
Yeah, when you go outside, there's temperatures where you literally can't be outside of your truck for more than 30 minutes.
Right.
You have to jump back in the truck, and
that
you're
was
almost
called
dying.
life where I grew up. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, those are very difficult jobs, and they're very high paying because people die.
Yeah, they're hard work.
And there's not a lot of women taking those jobs.
No, and a good thing, too.
So this guy, I'm sorry, what is his name again?
Warren Farrell.
Warren Farrell, who wrote this book, was giving a speech about this book, and the response was so unbelievably violent and crazy and aggressive and also ignorant to what he was saying, ignorant and not wanting to debate the facts, but wanting to call him a misogynist, wanting to call this
I mean, you know, women die during childbirth as well. You know, it's a very strange thing. I mean, like, you know, yeah, you use a multivariate analysis. There are many reasons why, you know, and I think turn this over to Mary in a second, but there are many reasons why women make less than men. But let's just start with certain basic axioms here. Why is it that you know, taking care of children isn't paid? Right. Obviously, that's essential for the reproduction of our economy.
Well,
it's a consequence of a productive system and a certain kind of productive organization. Right. I mean, if you look at, they say that gender equality was relatively common amongst American slaves because you didn't have a situation where you had a man who controlled the income of the family.
Well, yeah,
right? You know, they were both owned by in foraging societies. I mean, most anthropologists recognize that it was very equal. So I just fail to see what the point would be. Yeah, in a certain specific kind of economic organization, of which there's been different instantiations in history, you can say that, you know, for multivariate reasons, men have an advantage, right? But there's nothing necessarily a priori about that.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of further mansplain this before turning it over, I think that oil rig example is super interesting because, first of all, like, people who worked on oil rigs were not paid more just as like a pure consequence of the fact that it was hard and dangerous work. Like that wasn't just some natural relationship that just sort of like, oh, you know, it would be impossible to have a society where you had hard and dangerous work like working on oil rigs and you weren't paid more for it. Because as you point out, right, childbirth is hard and dangerous and people do that for free. It's, I mean, presumably the pay rates that he's talking about were something that resulted from, you know, class struggle, from the organization of industrial unions, you know, by oil rig workers, you know, collectively organizing, you know, to demand the higher wage rate. And it's not at all true in this, you know, in contemporary Canadian or American society, that there's some general relationship across the board between how hard or dangerous some work is and how much people are paid for it. I mean, if anything, we've kind of seen with the pandemic, you know, that so-called essential workers, you know, who are asked to literally risk their lives in order to do their jobs, tend to actually be paid much less than people with you know, professional caste sort of jobs where you can just be given an employer laptop and sit at home.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, one of my best friends is a Boilermaker in Sarnia, right? I won't say his name in case he wants his privacy. But he's a good leftist, and I think the way that he would respond to this, in fact, I know the way he would respond to this because we talked about it, is first off, don't fucking invoke what it is that I do to justify some people getting paid more than others, because what I want is a world where A, fewer people have to do these kind of dangerous jobs, and B, where everyone gets a decent wage, and C, where hopefully and eventually there won't be need for anyone to do these kinds of jobs, because we'll live in a world where it's considered barbaric to ask people to go die no matter how much money they get paid, right? So I think that there's something really slippery about a lot of the reasoning that's going on there. But I'll leave it to Marion since we were talking about the gender issue.
Yeah, no, I wanted to go back to something that Ben said, which is like, but this has to do partially with the class struggle, of course, on the side of like unionized workers and stuff. But I was just gonna say too, it also has to do with what we value in our society. Like all our lives are like the whole like market capitalism that we have is based on the consumption of oil, right, as one of the main things that drives our like energy consumption. So it also has to do with like what we value, like, or what capitalism values like as important industries, and the fact that there's more money put in there, right? Like if there like more people care about green technologies, like there will be way far more money put in there, right? Maybe workers will make more money there than elsewhere, right? But not just I like, for my first point was like, there's a lot of feminists that recognize that the gender gap is a multivariant analysis. Actually, today I don't think I know like people that do this for a living that will say it's only about this issue, right? Like, and I say people that do this for a living, like people that specialize on this, right? I do know some sort of militant feminists that do tend to reduce the issue, but as I said, the people that are like in most of the times that do it, that specialize in this, they do recognize it, right? We have, for example, intersectional analysis, that the whole point of intersectional analysis is to say, well, it has to do with race, right? It has to do also with geography. It's not the same to be a woman in the global south that in, like the north and developed countries. And to me, what strikes me the most when I like listen to Peterson's videos is that he says, no, like there's no such issue as a gap. Because the dude that does the hard job, if he risks his life, should be paid more. And it's like, what the gender gap, what the pay gap analyzes is they take it case by case, right? So, for example, if Matt and I, who have PhDs, do the same work, have the same obligations, right? And he gets paid more. If we disqualify everything else, why does he get paid more, right? If let's say like there's a standard of like expectations that we both meet, right? We have the same exact title, we have like a degree even for like similar or the same university, right? Why is it that a man gets paid more? And then the only thing left to explain that is gender. And that's what this analysis want to highlight. So just like the fact that Peterson jumps from this specific analysis that the pay gap like sees to the fact that, but these dudes are risking his life, like he should get more money. It's like, wait, what if you had a woman in that same saying, like, let's look at the woman, right? That do that also work and see, right? Like in that industry, do they get paid for that specific job? Do they get paid more, get paid less? And what we can conclude, and what this pay gap analysis conclude, is that even if it's certain industries, women do get paid more, for example, because they are more like as a gender, right? Like teachers, right? Even then, if you have certain sectors of the economy where women get paid more, it doesn't mean that there is no gender gap, right?
Yeah, and I'll also add that something that conservatives will often point out here, and they sort of, in a weird way, seem to see as a trump card in this discussion, is that a lot of gender pay differentials can be explained by women with young children not working, or working fewer hours, or taking breaks in their careers and then coming back and then not being able to climb back up. And the way that they sort of treat this as a trump card is they'll say, oh, see, so this is just a matter of people making choices. This isn't unjust. It's not oppression, which, among other things, like it just treats these choices as if they take place in a vacuum, and they have nothing like, I mean, one, you can talk about the cultural issues behind which choices which people make, but also, and honestly I would say more importantly, you have it just treats the sort of choices that are available as if they're the only choices that could be available, like as if we couldn't have generous state daycare as that in order to change the choices that are available to opt between for working women. It's really it's really disingenuous and gross because it sort of takes a politics that's actually very bad, for people trying to raise children, and justifies it by kind of using the children as props.
Absolutely. There's just one thing I wanted to say before we move on to the clips, right? And it pivots around this notion of merit, right? And before I say that, I'd like to point out that I'm not trying to denigrate the hard work that anybody puts into doing what they're doing. If anything, one of the things that I think COVID has exposed just spectacularly is how much our society depends on a lot of people who work really fucking hard, whether you're talking about nurses or cashiers or the people who just drop off your food, and very rarely get any kind of credit for that, right? So, but at the essence of my dispute with Peterson, and I imagine a lot of our disputes with Peterson, is this kind of problem of merit, right? Who gets what and do they deserve it? And I think one of the things that's worth noting is that the two most important philosophers of the 20th century who addressed this question both agreed that merit is such an ambiguous concept that it doesn't really have a lot of application when it comes to issues of distributive justice. In fact, we're really living in a world where the best attitude to take is there but for the grace of God go I, right? And the two philosophers that kind of came to this kind of conclusion were F.A. Hayek and John Rawls. Very different ends of the political spectrum. But one of the things that Hayek said is, look, if you're in a capitalist market and you happen to be selling porn and you make $1 million a year, and that's not necessarily because you merit something more. It's just because you created more value. And because our society happens to value these things, that's why you get paid more than a nurse or somebody who's doing UN aid in a foreign country, right? Doesn't have anything to do with personal worth, right? And I should point out Hayek, as is well known, was a right-wing economist, right? The other person who kind of addressed this, who I'm much more favorable to, obviously, is John Rawls, right? And I think there are problems with Rawls. You need to complement it with Marx for an analysis of power dynamics in society, amongst other things, not to mention the dialectic of history. But one of the things he says is, look, like, why do people get ahead, right? Peterson talks a lot about natural talents, right? Some people have higher IQs, or some people are born stronger or faster, or whatever the fuck it happens to be, right? And he'd say, well, that's just a genetic lottery, right? That has nothing to do with individual merit. And then he goes on to social factors, and he said, look, some people are lucky enough to have their daddy read to them when they were a kid, and then they grow up to be literate people. Others had parents who slapped them around when they were kids, and they grow up to have a lot of problems, right? That's, again, just morally arbitrary. It has nothing to do with you personally. And then the third reason he says people get ahead is because you, again, happen to have something that's valued by the market, right? Which is why you can sit there and sell methamphetamine or crystal meth and make a lot of money. But if you decide to sell something like a handbook to socialism, you probably make a lot less money than the Walter Whites of the world, right? But that's not because the handbook to socialism is less worthwhile than crystal meth. It's just because, again, the market happens to reward you if you have the talent at producing crystal meth, and it doesn't if you have a talent at writing on issues of social democracy and socialism, right? So you take all these three factors together, and we really have a very, very ambiguous idea whenever we appeal to something like merit. And it's quite telling that Peterson doesn't address any of these factors, which have been well known in the literature for, I don't know, fucking 80 years now.
Yeah. And I think that certainly just to put a bow on the the Rawls point, which I think echoes that Marx thing about natural aristocracy we were talking about earlier. There are lots of different things that they're like merit, right? There are lots of different things that could conceivably be seen as meritorious, and in lots of different social arrangements. The skills that will allow you to rise through the professional managerial class, career, educational and career hierarchy are very different than the skills that would earn you a place in like a warrior caste in a different kind of society. And it's a matter of dumb luck, whether you happen to be born in a society that rewards your particular skills. Speaking of which, by the way, so Dave L., thank you for the super chat, says this point of the discussion, shout out Catherine Liu's Virtue Hoarder's book. It's a good read. It sounds like one. I have not read it. I've seen her talk about it. We'll definitely read that and have her on to talk about it at some point. I would also shout out Freddie DeBoer's book, The Call to Smart, which is very good on the Rawlsian point that
I haven't read that yet, but I really should. Thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah, you should. Like, there was a lot of discussion about it that was like sort of about the like 10 pages or whatever where he talks about genetics. But I think that I think that like honestly you could have cut that and the whole book would have stood just as well without it, because his basic point is about luck, and it doesn't really matter whether it's genetic luck or socialization luck.
Yeah.
But Conrad, I knew you wanted to throw in before we moved on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly, it's also important to remember the origin of where these terms come from, like merit, right? So, I think it was Michael Dunlap Young wrote a book in 1958, and the title was The Rise of Meritocracy. And what he was partially satirizing in the book was this notion of a society based on merit. And if you look at again, the origin of a society where the most talented people will be successful. I mean, if you go back to, the feudal era, obviously it would have been ridiculous to suggest that the most talented people are the most successful, right? But essentially, after you have things like the French Revolution, after you have the antecedents of modern democratic society, which are established, you have this sort of effort of people who were wealthy, right, to channel the resources, right, and position themselves as being more talented than others. And nowhere is this clearer than if you look at Sciences Po in Paris, which is the most prestigious school in France. I'm in Paris now, of course. There's the inaugural speech of Sciences Po, I think it's the late 19th century, by its founder, Émile Boutmy. What he says basically in the speech, he's very, very candid about it. What he says is that, the masses have risen up, right, against us, the wealthy, right, and they're threatening to strip us of our position. Right. So what we need to do now is invest more and more in our resources into actually accumulating genuine merits that will allow us to position ourselves as superior members of society and to justify, right, our position. So again, I think when Jordan Peterson uses these words, it would be helpful as well to go back and to recognize how historically specific, right, the discourse of merit, which he is dependent upon, right, is. I mean, for much of human history, that just wouldn't have had, much purchase at all, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Which is, sorry, Matt, real quick, and then let's watch the next clip.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Conrad. I mean, half the time when I was watching those clips, and before he wrote the book, I watched God only knows how many in addition to reading his books. But like a lot of the time, I'd just be like, just calm the fuck down, okay? I don't want to hear about Wrens. I don't want to hear about the double helix. I don't want to hear about, how it is that if we look at Osiris and, all that stuff. I just want you to give me 3 straight arguments for why we should hold to this political position. And I want you to give me 3 foils for each one, right? Who believes this? Why are they wrong? What should we do instead, right?
Yeah. And
it's rare it's very rare that you'll find that in his writing, right? It's usually just like the Wrens and then, this guy in Northern Alberta. And then when we look at Jung and then Nietzsche, and then we'll go forward from that. And it's just like, calm down, okay? 3 arguments, 3 fucking foils. Give it to me straight, okay?
Yeah, no, for sure. Especially because, there's a good... Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints has a really good video essay on Peterson where she makes the point that this whole sort of structure of what we can generously call argument that he uses against socialism and against sort of SJW-ish progressives, and he kind of equates the two, could just as easily have been used for to oppose literally any other form of social progress because this whole thing that, well, look, people objecting to this specific social hierarchy, whether it's traditional gender roles or, the economic hierarchies of capitalism or whatever, don't understand that, even lobsters and wrens have hierarchies and, goes so deep into our nature, and the only way to try to make everything perfectly equal would be by inviting some nightmarish gulag state and, all this stuff. Like, you could use this entire edifice rhetorically to, like an 18th century, royalist opposing the French Revolution could have used it. A 19th century, antebellum Southerner could have used it, opposed this to, the abolition of slavery. Because what is it special about this particular attempt to undo this hierarchy that goes against, the principles of order and nature and, all that stuff? Which again goes back to that, distinction, Michael's distinction against the web about how, the left essentially historicizes social hierarchies, shows that they came about in certain circumstances, and and could potentially go out of existence in other historical circumstances. Whereas people like Peterson always want to either naturalize or mythologize it, which is a good lead-in to talking about one of my favorite Peterson moments. So this is after our friend, past guest, Richard Wolff, had invited him to a debate back in 2018. Obviously before he decided eventually he was going to accept the invitation from Slavoj Žižek. And this is Peterson's response to Wolff.
There's this professor, I think his name is Wolff. He put a challenge up on YouTube to me a couple of weeks ago to debate him. And what did he say? He said, he criticized my criticism of Marx. He said, well, that Peterson, he's basically stuck in 1989. It's like, we've progressed way past the time of the Stalinists. It's like, I thought, well, how about if a Nazi said that? Just out of curiosity. It's like, well, it's not 1945, anymore. It's like us National Socialists. We've progressed way past what happened in Nazi Germany. It's like, we should don't be stuck in the past, right? It's time to give us another chance. It's like, well, how about no? How about well, we have the Soviet Union with the 20 million dead there, and we have Mao's China with God only knows how many people were killed there, and we have Cambodia, we have Vietnam, and Venezuela isn't looking that great, by the way, and Cuba can't feed itself, and that's just a smattering of Marxist catastrophes. It's like, well, how much evidence do you need exactly? And here's also what I think about modern Marxists. This is what they think. First of all, they think they're driven by compassion, and they're not, because they're not saints. And second, what they truly believe is, well, everyone so far that's implemented Marxism, they weren't really the true acolyte of Marx that I am. They didn't have the real insight into the Marxist philosophy that I do. If I would have been running the Soviet Union, instead of Stalin, I would have ushered in the communist utopia. When the truth of the matter is that had you been a genuinely compassionate Marxist in 1915, your head would have been among the first on the chopping block. You can be absolutely certain of that. So I don't buy any of it, and I don't understand for the life of me why it's any more permissible in polite society to proclaim proudly that you're a Marxist after the absolute catastrophe of the 20th century than it is to claim that you're a National Socialist. So that's how it looks to me. I'm no fan of left-wing collectivists, or those on the right for that matter.
We'll talk about that in a moment.
All right.
Probably because
well,
it's called the monopoly.
So I have a bunch of stuff to say about that, but first let's throw to the panel.
Could I just say that one of the things that pisses me off more than anything else about this is I give him 5% on this, right? I do think that there were massive catastrophes committed in the name of Karl Marx, and that any sensible leftist who wants to employ him has to acknowledge that, and you should try to be winning converts, right? Rather than just ignoring that's a problem. And I think people have been aware of this since John Lennon wrote Revolution, and he said, you don't go winning friends by talking about Chairman Mao, right? Sometimes you gotta reinvigorate someone, right? At the same time,
Jesus Christ, Matt, you're really upsetting me here. The line is, if you go around carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, no one's going to want to get with you anyhow.
Very, very true. Okay, my bad. But
don't quote that incorrectly on this show.
I won't.
Not in Britain in the 60s, anyway. The contexts vary, we should acknowledge.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, he's far more generous to somebody like Martin Heidegger, right? Who he quotes as a major influence on his work in the opening of 12 Rules for Life. And Martin Heidegger wasn't kind of a Nazi, or wasn't an inspiration on the Nazis. He was a Nazi, right? He joined the Nazi Party. He participated in trying to turn students onto Hitler. He sat there and he tattled to the Gestapo on many different faculty members. And I'm just not sure how he'd respond to somebody saying like, well, I can't believe that you would quote Heidegger in polite society any longer. What are you doing referring to them in the opening of this book about, personal responsibility and so forth? Are you trying to vindicate the Nazis? It'd be an absurd claim. And I think there are ways that we can talk about having an intelligent discussion on the virtues of Heidegger's thinking. And I think that there's a lot of ways that we can intelligently approach something like Marxism, which is a vastly more interesting, complicated, and ultimately, I think, redeemable political project than Heidegger's was.
Yeah, I mean, right. Like, I mean, Peterson loves Nietzsche. I mean, even though obviously Nietzsche's conclusions are very, very different from Peterson's on a lot of subjects like Christianity, but he's still a big fan. He often refers to him, and generally, most of the time in a positive way. And if you're going to blame Marx for people in the 20th century who claim to be influenced by Marx, I don't understand, how you can, not do the same thing to Nietzsche and the far worse people, who claimed his influence. And then Heidegger, as you point out, I mean, it's not even a matter of influence. That this is like Heidegger was literally a Nazi, party member. And again, Peterson often quotes him, extremely positively. So if anything, it's kind of funny that this double standard that he claims about, Marxists and Nazis, that if anything, he has it, but it's in the opposite direction, and it's just very strange, like especially in the Heidegger case, because like whatever you think about the the messy issues about what to think about these 20th century sort of authoritarian state socialist experiments. Like certainly the idea that like anybody who calls themselves Karl Marx, as far as I know, the only head of state, who existed in his lifetime, who he thought highly enough of to send him a friendly telegram was who was obviously democratically elected. And the one sort of radical experiment that existed at the time, that Marx supported and talked about as a harbinger of socialism, was the Paris Commune, which was radically democratic. So yeah, I think the double standard is very strange. So let's just say that's noted, and let's move on. But I think there's also a lot wrong with the rest of what he's saying, besides this sort of strange and strained attempt to compare, Marxists and Nazis.
I'll save my further remarks on this till everyone else is gone, but I do feel that we should hear from your cat, who clearly has very strong opinions about this. And like, if we're going to be good Democrats, right, the fact that she's trying to intervene, or we need to give them a voice, right? They need to be
well, he is, well, we got him, when my wife and I were living in Korea. So as a native of the Asian continent, he might object to the way that Peterson is blurring together some very different nations and experiences there when he lists off like Cambodia, Vietnam, as examples of places where socialism existed and was terrible, when in fact, if you know just a little bit about history, the killing fields in Cambodia, that's our side of the Cold War. The U.S. was openly backing the Khmer Rouge when Vietnam invaded to try to stop the killing fields, and that's not some leftist conspiracy theory. I mean, that's like UN votes.
Yeah, there's also the 20 million people killed by colonialism, right? Often justified by a combination of we need to Christianize these people, or we need to bring the joys of capitalism and modernization to them, right? So let's not delve too highly into that.
That's it, isn't it? It's like, and I think I want to be a little bit careful just in terms of responding to this, because I don't believe that it's necessarily possible to fully dissociate the work of Marx from these events which transpired in the 20th century. I do think that the position he's talking about when he says that, this claim of, I could have done it better, I think that's more or less exclusively a position of sort of the Western Marxist left. I think, throughout much of the globe, people continue to, Marxists throughout the world, continue to support the actions that were taken, or some of the actions that were taken by these regimes. But I want to just highlight a little bit, it's interesting his comment when he said that, if you really were, some sort of benevolent person, benevolent Marxist, your head would have rolled in about 1915. I mean, if you look at sort of the aggressive character, right, and the voluntaristic and aggressive character of Leninism and how it was forged, you know, in many ways it was a response to what had happened in the Paris Commune, right? And what had happened in the Paris Commune, right? Well, you know, after there had been this attempt to establish this sort of democratic socialist project, after there had been, you know, a thorough effort to implement democracy, right, in that context, you know, troops poured in and killed tens of thousands of people, right, in order to retake the city, you know, and for better or for worse, right, what Lenin said is, you know, we're not going to lose this time. We're going to do whatever it takes, right? So now I'm not saying that that's good or that's bad, right? But what I am saying is that, you know, if you look at the horrific atrocities committed in the name of ideologies that Peterson advocates, right? I think that very often, you know, the theater that these ideologies were entering and trying to penetrate was an extremely violent one. You know, and resorting to extreme measures was the way that they sort of asserted themselves, you know, on the world stage of history, right? So again, and it's just self-negating, right? Because again, you know, Noam Chomsky said, for example, that the United States, you know, statistically probably killed the most people in the 20th century, right? How can he advocate what he advocates, right? You know, if having killed a lot of people is supposedly grounds for rejecting an entire ideology.
Yeah, and I would just add that whereas you're certainly right, you know, I don't think that anti-Stalinism is by any remote means limited to Western Marxists. I think that even within those societies, you find, you know, plenty of, you know, dissident communists, you know, with those positions. But I also think that it's a weird caricature, and it's a weird caricature that's worth mentioning for reasons that go beyond whatever you think about the issue of what's, you know, was, you know, used to be referred to as actually existing socialism. Because I think that his caricature of that sort of Western Marxist position, oh, if I were in that position, if it were me instead of Stalin, you know, I wouldn't have done these terrible things, is very similar to his caricature of Marxism and really of economic leftism as a whole, which is that these people are saying that they're just motivated by compassion. And in both cases, what he's taking Marxists and socialists to be is to have his position, which is that all of politics is really a matter of individual moral character, when that's not at all, you know, the classical Marxist position, you know, whatsoever, right? The classical Marxist position is to talk not about individual moral character, but about social institutions and their consequences, and, you know, and how, you know, the economy could be reordered to avoid those consequences. And the classical Marxist position is not that the primary thing, you know, the primary means of changing society is to motivate people based on compassion for others. The classical Marxist position is that the primary way, and this goes back to the oil rigs, you know, the primary way of changing society is to organize the majority of society on the basis of shared self-interest, that most people are, you know, that most of society belongs to the working class, and their interests are served by organizing first for a better position in that society, and then for a different kind of society. So I would say that the same way that, you know, like Western Marxists or dissident communist tradition, you know, standardly didn't say, oh, the bad thing is that Stalin was at the top of that political system rather than somebody more benevolent. Instead, they objected to the political system and they wanted a different one. I'd say the same way, you know, this idea that, you know, Marxism is all about, you know, is all about appeals to compassion, you know, just sort of, you know, just sort of misses the point, you know, that the Marx, you know, the traditional Marxist solution, you know, to the inequities of capitalism isn't to say that you should get people who already have power in that society to, you know, be more benevolent. You know, like if anything, that's the standard conservative solution. You know, that you should have. It's like Ron Paul saying that you don't need to give people health care because, you know, in the old days the church would have just passed the collection plate. You know, the Marxist solution is to say, no, you should take all the people who don't have power and get them to organize on the basis of their shared interest in something else.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, just as a technical point, anybody who spent any time perusing the Marxist literature would be aware of this fact. In fact, I'm occasionally critical of the fact that Marxism tends to rely upon implicit normative arguments rather than those that are explicated. But there were good reasons for this in the 19th century, and They were well expressed, for instance, by Engels in the Anti-Turing, right? Which was this argument that we want to be dialectical and historical rather than making claims or appeals to justice or sentiment, for that matter, right? And this was, in fact, the basis of Marx and Engels' critique of the utopian socialists, right? Which is that they relied on these warm, fuzzy humanist conceptions of being compassionate to our neighbor. And this isn't the right way to approach the issue, precisely because it becomes ahistorical and moral rather than consonant with the kind of dialectical core of their thinking.
Yeah. Marion, I think we've heard from everybody else on this.
Yeah, I wanted to say, or rather than to discuss Marx in the wrong reading, or however you want to call it, the leap Peterson takes from criticizing actually existing Marxism into saying, because these fail and because we have Stalin, then we should not have leftist movements today. I think, to me, that's like also totally like, and he does this all the time, like in many respects, right? Like, for example, also when he talks about feminism, he just like groups feminists and feminist movements into like kind of a single ideology, right? And I think it's the same he does when he says like, oh, these leftist collectivist projects, right? As if everything is just Marxism or wanting to advance like a certain type of Marxism, right? As you pointed out, like they're also different. Like if I see people fighting the most in the left, is usually Marxists and feminists, right?
Yeah,
that tells you how that's like just like not unified like movement, right? And I think I don't know, I think it's very dangerous because like as we saw with the rise of Trump and the rise of populist movements in around the world, there's a lot of distrust and resentment towards like what's considered elites or educated people, right? And I say elites because like truly like every time we live in precarity as like professors and PhD students, I really question where the hell, like, why do they say elites or whatever, right? So like, I think it's quite, he's fueled, to me, Peterson is fueling into that, right? And to me, that's why it's still important in engaging with like him and people like him that express the same distrust, right? Because of what we had with Trumpism, this whole idea like, no, don't trust them, etc. But also to say, sorry, I totally missed my point, but to point out this, right, like kind of this grouping of like a different array of very antagonistic like movements to the left into one single thing, and just to say, oh, because you failed in the past, you should not get another opportunity, right? But to me, sometimes what makes Peterson such a reactionary, right? Like, oh, we should like rewrite it, like this should have never happened, or
yeah, well, it's also, I mean, it's there's also something crazy about this, like given that, you know, the other half of what he does is this is like self-help, and you know, I'm just trying to imagine somebody who came to him, you know, like, you know, came to some talk that he gave about self-authorship and, you know, and taking charge of your life, or who came in for a session in his clinical psychology practice, who told him that he'd failed at something before, so he probably should never try again, you know, and I'm trying to imagine what Peterson would say about it. I don't think that he would approve of that, would be my guess.
It's also like, you know, a good question too to ask is like, did we fail? I mean, you know, if we have a weekend, right, you know, that's because of labor unions. You know, it's like China, 800 million people out of poverty. I mean, yeah, there are lots of bad things, but I think describing, you know, the left, the history of the left as failure is like a tremendously unnuanced way of approaching the question to begin with, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd like somebody to ask him if he thinks that his home country should privatize its healthcare system. I mean, I'd be fascinated to hear his answer.
Well, I just wanted to say on Marion's point about the left being treated as a monolith on the political right, by the political right. This is something that I've always found really amusing, right? And it reminds me of an old Jewish joke that I learned from Richard Evans last week, right? And it was made during the Holocaust, and there was two guys. They were sitting on a bench, and one of them was reading the Nazi newspaper. And his friend turned and looked to him, and he's like, well, why is it you're reading that? You know, it's trash, filth, you know. And he's like, well, this is the thing. I live in a ghetto in real life, but when I read this, I'm told that I'm the head of a worldwide global conspiracy, and everything is being pulled or orchestrated by me in some way, shape, or form, right? And that's always what I think whenever I read Don't Burn This Book by Dave Rubin, or The Right Side of History by Ben Shapiro. Because in those books, I learned that I'm part of a global elite that's controlling every aspect of culture, and that we're all united and we're never going to win unless a bunch of brave and hardy conservatives stop us, which is very different than the left I know, where every 5 minutes or so, we like to just choose something where it's just going to be an intractable difference, and then we all decide that we're going to take a break from one another and not band together to tackle real problems, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Before we go any further, Conrad, I know it's like 3 a.m. in Paris. Good to stick around for a little while longer.
I'll stick around a bit longer. Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I want to talk about the big moment in the arc of Jordan Peterson that we haven't talked about, which is this very strange reversal actually from the last clip that we watched, because in that clip he said that he wouldn't that he refused on principle to debate Richard Wolff because that would because of the horrors of Stalinism, and somehow, even though, if anything, I think I mean, Zizek, is certainly not a Stalinist any more than Richard Wolff is. In fact, he was a democratic dissident in Yugoslavia at one point. But out of the two of them, right? I mean, Wolff is actually much more, strident about the difference between the sort of socialism he advocates and what existed in some of those countries. So it's kind of funny that he did end up being willing just to swallow his principles and debate Slavoj Žižek. And in that debate, he had a bunch of he calls them axioms for some reason. As far as I can tell, Peterson just likes the word axiom because it sounds logic-y, mathy, even though what he's describing clearly aren't axioms. Like an axiom is a basic, unargued, assumption that everything else follows from. This is not what he's describing, but whatever. What he calls the axioms of Marxism, and so Forrest has assembled some clips where Peterson is going through the axioms, and I'd really love the panels. We'll try to keep it quick because there are a bunch of them, but I'd really like to hear the panel's thoughts about these.
Logic-y math is a great term, by the way.
Thank you.
So I took the 10 propositions that you guys wrote, and I found them in the Zizek-Peterson debate and kind of cut them into a thing that can be just debunked really fast.
All right, let's do it.
Hold on.
10 of the fundamental axioms of the Communist Manifesto. And so these are truths that are basically held as self-evident by the authors. And they're truths that are presented in some sense as unquestioned. And I'm going to question them and tell you why I think they're unreliable. So here's proposition number 1. History is to be viewed primarily as an economic class struggle. First of all, the proposition there is that history is primarily to be viewed through an economic lens. And I think that's a debatable proposition because there are many other motivations that drive human beings than economics. And those have to be taken into account, especially that drive people other than economic competition, like economic cooperation, for example.
All right, so axiom of Marxism, yeah or no?
I should say that if the only thing you actually read was the Communist Manifesto, which is apparently the only thing that he has read in a very long time, I could see why you would come to that conclusion, since it does have this very striking line. The history of every society hitherto has been the history of class struggle. And again, you just look at that and say, oh, this is Marx's kind of axiomatic point on this. But then you forget that this was a political pamphlet that was aimed at the masses, and it was intended to be sexy and dynamic and striking. And I should say it is a dynamic and striking pamphlet, right? Some of my favorite lines from Marx and Engels are in it, right? Particularly the one about everything solid melting in the air under capitalist conditions, right? But I think if you look deeper into their work, and I don't mean much deeper, I mean just superficially deeper, even to things written around the same time period, like the German ideology, you realize that they have a much more complicated vision of society than just class struggles determine everything, right?
Yeah, or I mean, like you read like the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, which came out just a few years later, which is actually, if you want to, if you want Marx's theory of history, and you don't want to bother with secondary sources like the G.A. Cohen book, Karl Marx's theory of history, that would be a good place to start. And it is true, obviously, that the class struggle, has a very important place in Marx's view of history. But this idea that Marx doesn't recognize there being any other factors that have anything to do with historical change. Again, you can see how you get that if the only thing you know about Marx's theory of history is the first paragraph of the Communist Manifesto, which, just to underline and circle what Matt just said, Jordan Peterson, by the time he debated Zizek, had spent years going around the world constantly railing against the evils of Marxism, and he admitted at the beginning of the Zizek debate that that he just reread the Communist Manifesto for the first time in 40 years. And I think it's safe to say that if he, the Communist Manifesto is this thick. Mm-hmm. If he just reread that for the first time in 40 years, right? If he hadn't even read that in decades, I'm fairly certain that he wasn't, he didn't read the 18th Brumaire, or Nevermind, Capital, or Gundrisse, any of these things. I mean, literally, he is just going by this one pamphlet, but he's also reading it in a very reckless way. That this is like that, like this paragraph where Marx is sort of having this prose poetry about class struggle is just the beginning and end of his theory of history.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow that up by saying, even if you went deeper into the Communist Manifesto, which isn't very far since it's only about yay big, you'd see that their vision is more complicated, right? You don't even need to go into Grundrisse or Das Kapital or any of those vastly more complicated works, right? And I don't want to get too much into what Karl Marx's vision of history here is, but it's a dialectical one, right? And as Conrad pointed out, and I think you pointed out also, Ben, you can find some expressions of support for capitalism in the Communist Manifesto that would outdo anything you would see in Milton Friedman, right? This argument that he puts forward, along with Engels, that has created wonders that the world has not yet seen, right? That for the first time we become conscious of the actual material conditions of our society, right? The argument that technology has been rapidly accelerated by the kind of impetus of capital, right? But then it has its problems, which generates something like class struggle, right? In the 19th century. So you don't even really need to go that far in order to recognize that what's going on here is a lot more subtle than just capital is bad, workers good, get rid of the former, and everything will go peachy clean. Right?
I don't know if it's in this section or if it has to do with one of the other propositions, but he says something like Marx thought that class struggle was always between bourgeois and proletariat, which again would be an oversight, because even in the Communist Manifesto he says that there's a simplification of class antagonism, right, which is characteristic.
Even in the opening lines of the Communist Manifesto, he talks about other forms of class struggle. But let's get Forrest. Let's get a few more of these propositions in. So I don't want to keep this going too late. Hold on, just a second. So yeah, let's do like propositions, 2 to 4 or something, and take them as a chunk.
And so that's the next problem. It's that, this ancient problem of hierarchical structure is clearly not attributable to capitalism, because it existed long in human history before capitalism existed, and then it predated human history itself. So the question then arises, why would you necessarily, at least implicitly, link the class struggle with capitalism, given that it's a far deeper problem. And now it's also, you've got to understand that this is a deeper problem for people on the left, not just for people on the right. We're also actually always at odds with nature. And this never seems to show up in Marx. And it doesn't show up in Marxism in general. It's as if nature doesn't exist. Okay, now another problem that comes up right away is that Marx also assumes that you can think about history as a binary class struggle with clear divisions between, say, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And that's actually a problem because it's not so easy to make a firm division between who's exploiter and who's exploitee, let's say.
All right. Let's just take those three. So to review, Marx doesn't know about pre-capitalist class struggle. Marx doesn't know that there are intermediary classes and not just the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And Marx never says anything about nature. Anybody want to address any of this?
Let me grab the nature one. So I don't even, I'm sure you guys will have an easy enough time dissecting 2 and 4 because they're completely incorrect, right? The two, Marx never says that all inequalities because of capitalism. He never says that history is defined by struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeois. But as regards the third point about nature, it is interesting because in Marxist studies, you've had this, for a long time, I think there was this notion that Marx was just a kind of productivist, right? That he didn't really care too much about nature, that he made arguments against Malthus, right? And that those arguments showed, in a way, when Marx suggested that there aren't these finite limits in terms of the population we can support, that he thought nature was simply something inexhaustible. Of course, knowledge of something like the climate crisis would have been totally unavailable to him at the time. But there's a great book on this subject called by Kohai Saito, and it's called Karl Marx's Eco-Socialism. And in that, what Saito, he goes, really pours through the Marx Engels archives in German, and what he shows is that when Marx read the 6th or 7th, so Marx was very influenced in terms of attacking Malthus' arguments about, the finitude of the food supply. He was very influenced by the changes that had happened with soil science, right? Because soil science had greatly enhanced, the efficiency of these crops. This led Marx, and we're always going to be talking about soil, right? When we try to talk about ecology in Marx's era. But this led Marx sometimes to suggest that, well, perhaps the limits are kind of infinite, right? But one thing that's interesting is when Marx went through the 6th edition, I think, or 7th edition of Liebig's agricultural chemistry, Liebig recognized that there was a limit, right, to what could be done in terms of the rejuvenation of the soil. He said, well, maybe we can't do this infinitely. And then right after that, influenced by that, Marx introduced a new term into his vocabulary, and that term is irreparable rift, right? So what he was recognizing, right, for probably the first time in his life, in anticipation of something like the current ecological crisis in the early 1860s, what he was recognizing is that capitalism may do damage to nature that will be fundamentally irreparable, right? So I'm not saying that Marx is totally above these charges, right? But I think simplistically to say that, Marx has no conception of the finitude of nature, right, or that nature doesn't appear in his work at all, is too easy a simplification.
Yeah, and I mean, we can even go further because, I mean, what you're talking about are cases where Marx is anticipating, later environmental concerns. But even before talking about that, nature, if we're just talking about whether it's as if nature doesn't exist or whether you say anything about nature, nature is all over the place, even in Hegel's theory of history, never mind Marx's, sort of idea that a lot of, historical progress should be understood as sort of increased independence from, the struggle with nature, again, is there even with Hegel. Certainly they're all over the place with Marx, with his understanding of the interplay between, basically technological progress, the material base, of society and the structure, that it gives rise to, please.
I was going to say Marx also co-signed on Engels' writings on the not dialectics of nature. He never uses this phrase in German, but dialectics with or in nature, right? And in Engels' writings on that, you have a very, very, dynamic conception of sort of the ontology of nature. So I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, right? But it certainly shows that Marx was keen to deal with the subject of nature.
Yeah. Oh, Ed, go back to the Critique of the Gotha program. Another one of his objections to Lassalleans is that they talk about labor being the only source of the source of production of value. He says, well, wait a second, what about nature? So this claim that he's I could understand somebody saying, what Marx said about nature is wrong, especially if they weren't giving him credit for these passages where he is, anticipating these later environmental concerns. But I have a much harder time seeing how anybody could, other than just by never reading anything by the Communist Manifesto, conclude that he doesn't say anything about nature. And it's even weirder to think. Look, in the opening sentences of the Communist Manifesto, those opening sentences are all about pre-capitalist forms of class struggle. So, Peterson should have seen that. And again, maybe less so in the Communist Manifesto, although even in the Communist Manifesto, he is talking a bit, about the existence of intermediary, social strata between the working class and the capitalist class. Certainly the last chapter, where he's talking about different political parties, that existed in Europe at the time. Or political movements, what they meant by parties in that context wasn't exactly the same as what we meant. But certainly if you read that stuff like the 18th Brumaire, he's constantly talking about the differences between the working class and, the peasantry, the working class and the petty bourgeoisie, the working class and, and the lumpen proletariat, the unemployable and criminal element. So this is just like, Marx is not above legitimate criticism, but these are deeply weird criticisms.
Yeah, I wanted to just address a different issue of this argument about nature that I think is germane to what a lot of right-wing critics of Marx point out. Because I think a lot of times when they say Marx's conception of nature is flawed, they don't mean his conception of the natural world. They mean his conception of human nature, right? And you see Peterson refer, for instance, to Dostoevsky a lot. And he's a favorite on the political right to invoke as a kind of critic of Marx, even though he didn't necessarily read his work. And the argument is, well, Dostoevsky shows you that Marx is wrong. Human beings are fundamentally not altruistic. And all you need to do is read The Devils to realize that a lot of the people who were going to wind up being the Bolsheviks in Russia, who claimed to be altruists, who wanted to create a golden socialist society, were actually bastards who were going to destroy everything and couldn't even be trusted to run a small town for a little while, let alone a state successfully, right? And I think that this really misunderstands what Marx's concept of human nature is, right? There's this kind of caricature that he assumes that we're all deeply altruistic and we're just perverted by capitalism into becoming selfish beings. And certainly he argues that it inspires us to certain kinds of alienated optimism and hyper-competitiveness. But fundamentally, his view of human nature is Hegelian one, I would argue. This is very controversial, right? Which means that he tends to agree with figures going all the way back to Aristotle that we're social beings first and foremost. But he does have the modernist conviction that the most important goal for human life, how we can achieve the good life, if you will, is by being free, which doesn't mean free in the sense of free within the market. It means being self-determining beings. And the twist that he gives is, of course, by saying that that in order to genuinely be free, we need to recognize that the full development of our capacities is dependent on the full development of everyone's capacities, right?
Which again, Peterson should know because he says that in the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, exactly. And whether this is true or not, and whether or not this Hegelian idea is right, and whether Marx is actually Hegelian, we can debate all that stuff. But it's a lot more complicated, a lot more sophisticated than Marx just believed everyone was an altruist at heart. Then capitalism came along. We all became selfish beings. We get rid of capitalism, and we'll go back to this Rousseauian primitivism, where we all hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and drink lemonade from the ocean. Right?
Well, and it's also, first of all, there's something deeply strange about, read Dostoevsky so you understand that Marx is wrong. Because it's like, look, Dostoevsky is a great writer. Everybody should read him. But I'm having a hard time imagining somebody thinking that, like, I don't know, pro-capitalist ideology was like falsified by reading Maxim Gorky novels, that like it's a, presumably we don't normally think that novels can do that, right? Like they like part of the reason to read literature is that it invites you into how somebody else sees the world, which is a useful exercise. But that's just how they see the world. That doesn't mean they're right, like that's how Dostoevsky saw Russian revolutionaries doesn't mean that that's how Russian revolutionaries actually were, which like almost feels like a weird thing to have to explain to people. And I'd also point out that you can, whereas I think, like you're onto something about Marx's thoughts about human nature, species being and all of that, and its roots in Aristotle. I'd also point out that, you can, Marxist political conclusions, might even detach, from be logically, independent of that view, right? In other words, that there are certain kinds of arguments you can make for those conclusions based on that view of human nature. But, there are other arguments you can make for those conclusions based on extreme Dostoevskian cynicism about human nature. If we can't count on people to be altruistic, that's a reason not to trust people with as much power over other human beings as capitalists have over ordinary people and in the sort of workplaces that exist right now. Marion, I saw you unmute yourself. Do you want to throw something in?
No, it was mostly a reiteration of what you said. And yeah, I also take issue with Peterson's reading of nature. I take a more like Adorno and Horkheimer reading on this, like the whole idea of the second nature, right? To me, Marx also view like this, how capitalism transforms, right? Social relations and therefore human nature. That's my reading. And then just his oversimplification of it, it's just I don't know, as you said, for someone that's gonna debate Zizek and it's been just ranting about leftism and Marxism, the fact that he says oh yeah, I just read barely read this in a long time. It's just, yeah, if you and I or whoever will do the same with Peterson, right? He will be, oh, you're extremely uncritical, being unfair to me. And so
yeah, right. Like if you said, oh, I haven't read anything on Peterson's list of great books, but but I watched I read the transcript of one speech by Ron Paul once, so I have a pretty good idea of what conservatism is all about. I think he would be correctly contemptuous of that. But
well, that's affirmative action for conservatives for you, right? Zizek, lifelong scholar of Marxism, National Post praises Peterson's self-help book, and he gets the debate, right?
Fair enough. All right, Forrest, let's watch 5 through 10. Let's just go through it and then comment on the whole thing.
It's also bad in this way, and this is a real sleight of hand that Marx pulls off, is you have a binary class division, proletariat and bourgeoisie, and you have an implicit idea that all of the good is on the side of the proletariat and all of the evil is on the side of the bourgeoisie. And that's classic group identity thinking, the fact that you assume a priori that all the evil can be attributed to the capitalists and all the good, the bourgeoisie, and all the good could be attributed to the proletariat, meant that you could hypothesize that a dictatorship of the proletariat could come about. And that was the first stage in the communist revolution. And remember, this is a call for revolution, and not just revolution, but bloody, violent revolution, and the overthrowing of all existent social structures. The next problem is, well, what makes you think that you can take some system as complicated as capitalist free market society and centralize that and put decision-making power in the hands of a few people, the mechanisms without specifying the mechanisms by which you're going to choose them? What makes you think they're going to have the wisdom or the ability to do what the capitalists were doing, unless you assume, as Marx did, that all of the evil was with the capitalists and all the good was with the proletariats, and that nothing that capitalists did constituted valid labor, which is another thing that Marx assumed. So Then the next problem is the criticism of profit. It's like, well, what's wrong with profit exactly? What's the problem with profit? Well, the idea from the Marxist perspective was that profit was theft. Okay, and then so the next issue, this is a weird one. So Marx and Engels also assume that this dictatorship of the proletariat, which involves absurd centralization, the overwhelming probability of corruption, and impossible computation, as the proletariat now try to rationally compute the manner in which an entire market economy could run, which cannot be done because it's far too complicated for anybody to think through. The next theory is that somehow the proletariat dictatorship would become magically hyperproductive. So, and then the last error, let's say, although by no means the last, was this, and this is one of the strangest parts of the Communist Manifesto, is Marx admits, and Engels admit repeatedly in the Communist Manifesto, that there has never been a system of production in the history of the world that was as effective at producing material commodities in excess than capitalism. Like that's extensively documented in the Communist Manifesto. And so if your proposition is, look, we got to get as much material security for everyone as possible, as fast as we can, and capitalism already seems to be doing that at a rate that's unparalleled in human history, wouldn't the logical thing be just to let the damn system play itself out? I mean, unless you're assuming that the evil capitalists are just going to take all of the flat screen televisions and put them in one big room and not let anyone else have one. The logical assumption is that, well, you're already on a road that's supposed to produce the proper material productivity. And so, well, that's 10 reasons as far as I can tell. And so what I saw in that the Communist Manifesto is like seriously flawed in virtually every way it could possibly be flawed.
I'd say I had visions of Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, where you go in, there's all the boxes and like all the treasures of the world located. And I was thinking about that, like the giant room where all the capitalists are hoarding the massive big screen TVs that they won't let give to anyone. Right?
Yeah, and Ekim Onaram, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Thank you for the super chat. Talks about the part about not just revolution, but a bloody, violent revolution. Almost as if JP doesn't think the status quo is pretty damn bloody and violent as it is, which is an excellent point. I'd also point out that if you actually look overall at Marx and Engels, you know, the several decades of things that they said, and not just the Communist Manifesto, there's a range of different things that they say in different situations about what they think transition to socialism might look like. It's not, you know, it's not one note. So there are several places starting in about the early 1870s where you know, like there's the La Liberté address to the First International. There's you know, there are various places in the letters, you know, interview there where they say, well, in advanced capitalist democracies, you know, like England and the United States. They thought that, you know, it might be possible to have a transition to socialism through a socialist party, you know, peacefully taking power, you know, democratically, although they worried that then the capitalists would respond to that in the same way that the slaveholders had responded to the election of Abraham Lincoln, which is, of course, a very prescient worry if you look at things like the fate of Salvador Allende in Chile. But in the Communist Manifesto, specifically, he's talking about countries in Europe that were ruled by monarchs. Like those are the countries where they're having revolutions, you know, or about to have revolutions in 1848. And even in England, you know, which was the one where, you know, the parliamentary system, you know, was already a constitutional monarchy where the monarchy still had some power, but it's mostly parliament. Working class people didn't have the vote, you know, in 1848. And the idea that, you know, violent revolution is acceptable when you can't vote when the people who the laws are applied to can't can't vote the rulers out of power. I mean, that bloody, violent revolution is acceptable in those circumstances. I mean, that's not just something that, people like Marx and Engels believed. I mean, that's stuff that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Thomas Paine believed that too, famously. So, I think in historical context, that's a very odd complaint. But
I would say even Edmund Burke actually argued for limited forms of a right to revolution, right? He supported the American revolutionaries for exactly that reason, amongst others.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so there's a lot here, but let's just do a lightning round. What do people want to pick out of rules 5 to 10, out of propositions 5 to 10?
Matt, you got to go, right? So maybe you should, I got to go soon too, but I can hang on maybe a little longer. So maybe you want to go?
Okay, I'll be really quick about this, right? I think there's a lot you could say about virtually every element of his kind of commentary, but the one that I wanted to focus on was this, right? First off, he gets this claim that Marx believed property was theft or profit was theft entirely wrong. In fact, Marx wrote a very famous critique of Proudhon, who used to claim that property was theft under the title "The Poverty of Philosophy." Right? Not one of his better books, but quite interesting. Right? I think a lot of this misunderstanding comes from a mischaracterization of Marx's theory of value, which Conrad and I have written about, I should say, so you can go take a look at our work there for Area Magazine. But long story short, one of the things that Marx says, in my interpretation, and I don't want to get into all the fights about this, right, is that, look, for the first time in human history, around the 18th, 19th century, we could see that labor is the primary source of value. And this was actually concealed from us for a long period of time. If you go back to Aristotle, Aristotle had no idea where economic value came from because he lived in a slave society. And so, frankly, he just didn't appreciate the labor of those who actually did most of the work in that society, right? Now we know better. And one of the kind of references that Marx points to is somebody like John Locke, right? He says John Locke believes in this labor theory of entitlement. He says that if you mix your labor with the land, that makes it yours. And later economic thinkers in the vein of Adam Smith and David Ricardo, who were good liberal capitalists, say the same thing, right? Which is why they claim that labor isn't just a source of entitlement, but a source of value, right? Because it's mixing your labor with the land that gives it worth, right? Now, I tend to believe that when Marx talks about, for instance, socially necessary labor time and exploitation, what he's claiming is that ideologically, if we actually believe this bourgeois claim that labor is the source of value and of entitlement, then capitalism is actually a system where, as he famously puts it, the rich try to reap where they have not sown, because somebody at Starbucks goes and makes your coffee for you. They're the ones who committed the labor to make that coffee. And then the company is the one that actually reaps all the profit from that, right? Which is not something that John Locke should be okay with, right? Putting it fundamentally, right? And I think that he's claiming that in a later society to come, we'll recognize that socially necessary labor time will also go the way of the dinosaurs, because we'll exist as a free, harmonious group where we'll produce for the benefit of all, rather than for exchange value, right? Now, whether that's true or not, who knows? But I think it's worth noting that, a lot of what he says about this is in many ways consonant with liberal capitalist ideology. He's just turning it on its head, I think, in a very innovative and creative way.
Yeah, right. No, I think a lot of that makes sense. I'd also, and in fact, I think that you can make a case that whatever you think about the labor theory of value, that a lot of the claims about exploitation can be separated from that. That the G.A. Cohen has a good paper about this. Yeah. Full name I'm blanking on at the moment, but it's called something like exploitation and the labor theory of value. I think that might be it, but it's on, I think, the Verso website.
Yeah. By the way, just a quick note. Althusser also and certain other Marxists tried to reconstruct Marx's labor theory of value using just prices. So basing it on the economic work of Piero Sraffa. So yeah, there's different examples. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And I'd just say that ironically enough, we haven't talked about, and we should probably wrap up. So, we probably won't, Peterson's rules, the 12 original ones, or the 12 more. I understand Conrad watched talk about this, so he actually knows what the 12 new ones are. But I will say, out of the original 12, I think almost all of them are fine. They're just generic self-help advice that you get from all sorts of places, but whatever, it's good advice, right? You should clean your room. The only ones that I'd object to, well, first of all, I'm not sure it's a good idea to pet random cats on the street. That might be a good way to bring back feline diseases to your cats at home. But otherwise, the only two that are objectionable are the do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, which is insane as child rearing advice goes. And set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world, which is just Peterson's reactionary politics, leaking in, disguising themselves as self-help advice.
I mean, there's a pretty big disconnect between not letting your children do anything that makes you dislike them and not bothering them when they're skateboarding either. Those are,
yeah, what if you dislike skateboarding? Come on.
Yeah, or they're skateboarding in the house. They're going down the stairs or something and really fucking things up.
No.
By the way, the skateboarding thing, he says the skateboarding, the guys who have to, the people who have to kind of take risks and develop their character through this. He clarifies that they're almost always men, right? The skateboarders. So it's an interesting addition. Do you mind if I just hop in with lightning, just a few points from the?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say real quick before you do that that one of the rules is be precise in your speech, and I don't think that Peterson is being terribly precise when he makes this leap from capitalists sometimes do productive work, true, to the idea that capitalists are appropriating the result of labor that they didn't do is false. The second thing does not remotely follow from the first thing. Just because capitalists, some capitalists in some circumstances do productive labor of various kinds, doesn't mean that they're not helping themselves to the results of other people's labor. I mean, even in plantation slavery, there are certain cases and certain historical examples where the owner of the plantation might actually do some agricultural labor personally. That doesn't mean he's not benefiting from the labor of his slaves. But Conrad, please.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly. So for the points, he says Marx says the proletariat is all good and the bourgeois is all bad. I mean, especially in his mature work, he certainly doesn't have this kind of Manichaean worldview. Actually, in Capital, I think at some point he says we only treat these people insofar as they're sort of actors or agents within this kind of social matrix, right? So he tries to distance himself from those kind of moralistic pronunciations. As regards the dictatorship of the proletariat, I think that term came from in a letter exchange Marx had with a journalist like Joseph Whedon or something. Anyway, just to be clear, that term didn't have any of the connotations at the time they used it that are associated with modern day totalitarianism. We don't need to get into it now, but it just didn't. It's anachronistic.
Well, I mean, look, we can just really quickly say that yes, there are a handful of times when Marx and Engels use this phrase. There's the stuff in letters. There's I think Engels' thing on the housing question. I believe he uses it there. There are a few times, but the one really concrete thing that is said about it is that the Paris Commune is the historical example, and that was neither a dictatorship in the sense of a dictatorship of a single person, nor a dictatorship in the sense of the dictatorship of a single party. Now, the actual analogy he's making with Roman history, I think there's a lot more that you could say about that. We could do a deep dive just on what Marx plausibly meant or didn't mean by the dictatorship of the proletariat. But one thing he clearly did not mean was something that was less democratic than what existed in the advanced capitalist democracies of his day. He was very clear about that. Matt, I know you have to go. Is there something you want to say first?
No, I do have to go, but I just want to say solidarity to everyone. And thanks a lot for having me on. I really enjoyed it. And actually, good job, Conrad. I think you were really brave to do this at that hour in the morning. So special props to you for that.
It's a job. Thanks, Matt. It was appreciated.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
I just want to say two other things really quick. The first one is just Marx says, Peterson says, how could Marx, have this sort of arrogance to think that people would be able to devise a system that could, manage itself. And I think, it's interesting because Marx has different propositions. He makes different propositions regarding what, and they're kind of scattered and fragmentary regarding what society will look like after capitalism as he imagines it. But that's not really why Marx is useful, right? Marx is useful because he showed, it's an imminent critique in Capital. He's useful because he showed, the structural problems with capitalism, that are very likely to lead to its demise at some point. What comes after that? Marx wasn't sitting there in the 19th century, having, in fact, it's a kind of humility, ironically, right? He wasn't sitting there in the 19th century saying, well, I can just lay this all out for you. Right. And the projects of the 20th century represent, some of them were more or less successful than others, but they did affect the world in a big way. And they were an attempt to devise a solution to this question, which Marx couldn't have known in advance.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to say as well is when he says that if you think, capitalism, if you realize capitalism is the most productive system, why not just let itself play itself out? If capitalism has ever benefited, and created these great societies, which Peterson often gives it credit for, like something like Sweden today or something. If capitalism has ever created a society like that, it's because of efforts, by organized labor, by the masses, to intervene into the system, and to make sure that they get part of that elevated productivity, right? It's not part of the tendential structure of capitalism, for the bourgeois to say, oh, just take this for free. Right? That's not how it works, right? That may have become part of the governing consensus at a certain point, but even that was catalyzed through popular struggle.
Yeah. I mean, Sweden did get a welfare state because it just sort of emerged naturally from, cultural homogeneity or everybody going to the same Lutheran church or something. It got it from really ferocious class warfare. If you actually start reading about the history of Sweden, I think that's all that's very well said. The one thing I'd add is that I know we kind of said this earlier. But it's worth, it's kind of worth saying twice because it's so fundamental, and because Peterson emphasizes this so much. Nothing that Marx says hints at this idea that all the good is in workers and all the bad is in capitalists. Marx is not talking about individual moral character. He's talking about economic systems. The reason perhaps that he's hoping for the victory of workers is that the economic system has such terrible results, very good results in terms of the productive force, increasing the productive forces of society as a whole, but very bad results in terms of the distribution of the results of that, and certainly in terms of democratic participation, and all sorts of other metrics that you could use. But the reason that the workers are the agents of change in Marx's thought is not that they're more morally virtuous people than the capitalists. It's that their economic interests, give them a reason to oppose the existing system, to band together and to try to create something better. So I really think that's worth emphasizing. Marion, do you have any final thoughts about any of Peterson's propositions?
Yeah, I guess I'll address the one that, like, when he says, "Oh, we don't have like any reason to see how the proletariat is going to become magically hyper productive," right? Like in a post-capitalist society, it's just such a naive reading. Sometimes when I think Peterson is a professor, right, and it's like, I wonder why what is it that he teaches, right? Because the whole point, as you mentioned, with Marxist theory of value, is that they are the ones that create value. They are the ones that create the commodities, right? He has the whole first chapters on Capital Volume 1 is exactly into showing you, right, by discussing previous economists, like Smith and Ricardo, right? It's like, how is it that they create value, right? So it's like there's going to be productivity, and I just stress this because I see a lot of these kind of very naive critiques today running around on social media on memes, right? That say oh yeah, criticizing capitalism on my iPhone, right? Or drinking my Starbucks as if a post-capitalist society that some people have in mind will not be productive, right? Lying on this idea that, oh no, the proletariat,
like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, criticizing the Soviet Union using a typewriter that he, that was manufactured at a state-owned factory, and eating food that was grown in collective farms. I mean, it's such a weird, childish thing to, to try to hunt for hypocrisy about. And I'd also add that I don't necessarily, I think, it would probably require a little bit more unpacking, and maybe we can do this sometime, to talk about this business about what Marx thought that the end of capitalism would mean for further development of the productive forces of society. But certainly a big part of what Marx thinks, if you read like the Fragment on Machines, is that, look, there's going to be technological progress one way or the other. Right? He thinks there is going to be technological progress whether you have capitalism or socialism. It's just that who gets to reap the rewards of that technological progress is going to be different depending on whether you have capitalism or socialism. That if you have the means of production are owned by capitalists, and you have technological advances that allow what's been what used to take 20 people 40 hours a week to be done with half the labor, then under capitalism the incentive is to keep the labor costs, is to use that to reduce labor costs. Only 10 people are going to work 20 hours 40 hours a week, and then so you've cut your labor costs in half, and so that's obviously more profitable. Whereas if workers or society as a whole are in charge of the conditions of production, then those advances in automation might play out very differently. You might have everybody just be able to work half as much time. And whether you buy that argument or not, it's just he's just not even engaging with what Marx thought.
Yeah, certainly. And I just want to say too, if you look at even these sort of supposedly depraved examples of communism. I mean, if you look at places like China or the Soviet Union, you had huge productive leaps that were made, right? So it's like, whether you think those are good, whether you think those are bad, they do suggest that people have, succeeded, in combining something like, or devising a way within something called communism, right, to greatly raise levels of productivity.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because I presumably Peterson would say, well, all of the the rapid industrialization that happened in the Soviet Union in the 30s and 40s wasn't worth the human cost. But then we're bringing in things other than how much you've increased the productive forces, which is precisely what he doesn't want to talk about when he talks about the history of capitalism. But this has been a really interesting discussion. I really appreciate all of you. So again, people want to read all of the further thoughts of the clever and charming people you've been watching for the last couple hours. This is Myth and Mayhem, a leftist response to Jordan Peterson from Zero Books. I also have a chapter in here. There's a introduction by Slavoj Žižek, and who obviously we're all big fans of. So do check that out. You can also order that from the if you want to support Red Emma's worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore, you can certainly order it from them, redemmas.org. So thank you, Conrad. Thank you, Marion. I will, Conrad, go to sleep. It's extremely late where you are. Really appreciate it.
I work at 8 tomorrow, so.
Yeah, you should really go to sleep.
Okay, thanks so much, Ben. I'll see you. Thanks, Marion.
All right. In a few minutes, we're going to bring on Vic Viana to talk a little Pink Floyd for the Substitute Music segment. But first, very excited. We are going to premiere a all new segment here on GTAA, which is the
really,
Biden update.
This really is a mind-blowing picture by Andrew World, our graphic designer. I'd like to eventually get some kind of like animated intro, or not, like where it's like videos of him being like, I don't know, like doing the corn pop thing and being like,
we need to get like some kind of little Biden intro music with it. Maybe we'll maybe we'll talk to Cole James Cash or Napoleon de Legend or one of those people to get him to do some sort of like intro song with the sound drops of him talking about, you know, Corn Pop was a very bad dude and all that. So I still like the listen fat where he's talking to the yeah exactly. Speaking of Cole James Cash, who wrote who is not playing every instrument or whatever, but he's the person who gave us the intro and outro music we use. Has been a repeated guest on the show. Send him some positive thoughts. Just had his birthday in extremely unpleasant circumstances. He just moved to Canada, and
it's funny. He told us on that stream when he popped up. I don't remember if it was last Saturday or the Saturday before, but when we were doing that stream with him, he was like, "Yeah, I'm not built for this cold weather."
And then he immediately proved it by slipping on the ice and shattering his good leg. So again, send good thoughts to Cole. He had
solidarity with Cole James Cash.
Yeah, at least thank God he's in Canada, so he's not going to be hit with a big medical bill.
Yeah, that's really good. I was supposed to go on his show, I think, in the next couple of weeks, and I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, he says, he texted me today. He said he's still going to do the show, even though he's going to have to do it in bed. So I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll see. So Forrest, what's going on this week in Biden?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on right now in Biden land. I'm not sure where you want to start with all of this, but he had his first military action in Syria, and I guess that's the best place to start. And here I have the Politico article that they released like right when it happened, and there's been a lot of information that we've learned since that doesn't really, carry out some of this, but. So there was a defensive strike, what we call a defensive strike, apparently.
Which is defensive strike somehow by the United States on the other side of the world in a sovereign country that we're not at war with, but it's still defensive.
There's been several bombings, I guess, on the Iraqi-Syrian border, and the Biden administration and our defense, I guess, our defense apparatus believes, and this is not corroborated by necessarily everyone, but they believe that it's an Iranian-backed militia group that's been doing it. Although, the New York Times kind of released a slip-up where they claim that actually they don't quite know that it was an Iranian-backed militia group, but we can get into that in a minute. So we destroyed several buildings in Syria, and they claimed that there was only one casualty, but we've since learned that there were 22 casualties from Biden's first military strike.
Yeah, which is, I saw Nathan Robinson point out this on Twitter. This is absolutely true. This is a much more serious crime than what Trump was impeached for the first time. The phone call, with the perfect phone call, which was certainly a sleazy quid pro quo effort, but it doesn't compare with murdering 22 people in violation of both U.S. and international law, since, of course, the Constitution vests war-making powers in Congress, there's no pretense to that in this case. You're also not supposed to initiate attacks against sovereign countries. If you say, oh, there's this militia that they were supporting that did this in this country, come on. As Joe Biden himself would say, come on, man.
And this kind of brings us to the Jen Psaki tweet from during the Trump administration, where she said, what is the legal authority for strikes? Assad is a brutal dictator, but Syria is a sovereign country. So
good. Now that I don't hear this particular Psaki bomb being, which is, by the way, what insufferable liberals are calling good Psaki press conference.
Oh, wow, yikes! I thought that was like something you came up with on the fly.
No, but I don't hear that being said now. But the exact same point applies, and so I think both the U.S. Constitution and the UN Charter, and it's also, and the reason to emphasize this, right? Look, it's not that the legalism is the main objection. Even I think that I agree with Noam Chomsky and what he said about when he was talking about international law being violated by the Vietnam War, that the if anything, Vietnam was a test of international law, not vice versa. That that the law would be bad if it didn't, if it didn't rule this out, not the other way around. But also,
and he wrote extensively also about the Bush administration further taking that international law point to the test, where they kind of stood up in front of the United Nations and said, we are the world power, pretty much.
Yeah, totally. And I think the other reason it's worth emphasizing the legal point is because elsewhere in This Week in Biden, there has been this just farcical thing where the Democrat, Biden ran on a $15 minimum wage. All the Democrats, did that. They made a big deal about this. It was, can be in the COVID, relief package.
Yep. The $2,000 check, COVID relief package.
Yeah. The 2000, whatever.
And we have some sound for that. After we get through the Syria stuff too.
Yeah. But like in the Senate version, well, they're going to have to do it through reconciliation because you didn't have the 60 votes, to defeat the filibuster. I wrote an article for Jacobin a couple of weeks ago about abolishing the filibuster. People want to check that out if they want to get the deep dive into that. But the reconciliation workaround isn't great because it only works with when you can show significant budgetary effects, and you do have
you get one, right? You get one. Because I was helping edit clips that Katie did with Matt Brunig, and he was kind of going through it, and he was talking about how he was talking about how you kind of get one big budget reconciliation attempt, I guess, a year or per congressional session.
Yeah.
That's a weird rule. Like, I don't.
And there are other big problems there. So like in theory, you should be able to do the budget you should be able to do the $15 minimum wage through budget reconciliation because the standard is that it has to have significant budgetary effects, which it does. Because if you pay people a lot more, one, their taxes increase, and two, people lose eligibility for some means-tested social programs. And of course, this is a problem with leaning too far on this workaround of the reconciliation, because of course you only get those significant budgetary consequences because of those two things. But of course, what we would want, especially during an unprecedented crisis, is for people to keep their eligibility for all these programs, to just raise the income floor. But once you do that, you risk losing the significant budgetary consequences, which
it's kind of the Wile E. Coyote shit, where it's like building these crazy like parliamentary contraptions to try to get anything passed.
No, totally. But in this particular case, there was this particularly crazy thing that the Senate the Senate parliamentarian said that they couldn't. But they actually couldn't do it through reconciliation. I should say, by the way, that there's a really good. I really like the framing here. I think this is exactly the way, rhetorically to present this argument. There's a really good tweet from Bernie Sanders a couple hours ago about this. He says. But more importantly, I regard it as absurd that the parliamentarian, a Senate staffer elected by no one, can prevent a wage increase for 32 million workers. So, nice system we've got here. But
it's been the same Senate parliamentarian, I think, since 2002 or something, right? Or 2000. It's been 2012, I think. It's been like almost a decade of having the same person who decides these things. And, the Republicans kind of know how to push around it, because at one point during the Bush administration, they fired the Senate parliamentarian because they didn't agree with.
And look, the vice president could overrule the parliamentarian anyway. Because the vice president is the head of the Senate, but Kamala Harris, look at you. But also, again, just to connect the dots with Syria, particularly absurd thing here is that they're trying to have it both ways, right? So on the one hand, they're saying, oh, I'm sorry. Like basically they're using the sorry, my mom said I couldn't for the $15 minimum wage. You know, the rules are the rules are the rules. You know, we can't defy the parliamentarian, the Senate staffers, you know, position within the structure of the rules is inviolable. But on the other hand,
you got parliamentary right in their name. You know, they're omnipotent.
Yeah. So they can't defy the parliamentarian, but they are willing to defy the War Powers Clause and the UN Charter to kill 22 people in Syria.
Interestingly, also, I guess Vox, I didn't get a chance to read through all of it, but I guess Vox broke down why the War Powers Act in this case is actually on extremely shaky ground. But which is interesting because they're not usually the ones who push on that kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah,
you know?
we've just been joined by our friend Vic Viana, and we're going to talk about music with him in just a minute. But first, there's a clip we're going to watch.
Oh, which clip do you want to pull up? The one that I did?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, so this is kind of crazy. I don't know. It kind of shows. Hold on, I gotta pull it up. It kind of shows how there's never any consequences. There's never any consequences for any of these sociopathic foreign policy establishment ghouls, and it ends up being like a revolving door for people who both through the military-industrial complex, but also just administration to administration. Like we never really want
a shocking admission by the U.S.
We never asked for these people to have any consequences for their failures. We never really question do they even know what they're doing besides in the moment. Like they always fall upwards.
General running the war against ISIS. How few U.S. trained Syrian rebels are left.
It's a small number, and the ones that are in the fight is we're talking four or five. And I agree with the chairman, sir, on the issue of there haven't been any dramatic gains on either side.
Dramatic. Yeah, that's different from, quote, tactically stalemated. Please, General.
We're confident in the target that we went after. We know what we hit. And we're confident that target was being used by the same Shia militia that conducted the strikes. And so you'll get more information in terms of the effects of the strike as time goes by. But I just wanted to make sure that, I gave you that viewpoint for me, that level of confidence that there is connectivity.
Yeah. So obviously, the U.S. efforts in Syria were disaster. I mean, I don't know how many could claim with a straight face that any American is somehow benefiting or being made safer or anything by any of this garbage.
Yeah.
So even if we had found more than like however many were left, like 6 moderate rebels to train in Syria.
I think there was 4 at one point, and we had started with 60, I believe.
Awesome. I kind of want to see the reality show version of that with the 60 moderate rebels being whittled down to 4. It's like, well, Abdullah has advocated Sharia law again, so he's not going to get a rose in the next round to find the 4 sufficiently moderate rebels in Syria. But if those 4 rebels had attacked, those 4 rebels. Had planted a bomb somewhere in Syria that had killed people, which is the point, right? I mean, that's what you train, rebels, moderate or otherwise, to do. I mean, if you were going to use Biden's rationale for this bombing now, then Syria could set off bombs in the United States and call it defensive because militias trained, by the United States and kill people there.
Look, Jack, those rules don't apply to us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just, I guess it's worth highlighting that, Lloyd Austin was the general in charge of the Syrian efforts, but obviously the failure wasn't all his fault. He was just the person they kind of brought up to take the heat in front of Congress. But still, like, they had him take that beating over and over and over again in front of, and get, like questioned in 2014, 2015 by senators and congressmen and congresswomen, and like it's just these humiliating, like, it's almost like a hazing ritual. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a failure, which means that in the next administration you're not going to get any kind of role, or you're not even going to move upwards. Like, considering the fact that he retired as a general after that, but then his defense secretary is a way bigger step up than just being a general.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, we're gonna switch gears, but President Biden, if you're watching this, which I assume you are, the minimum wage stuff, the serious stuff, it's not good. If you want us to be kinder when we do this segment next week, do better. But Vic Viana, we are always. Hey, how?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, no, our pleasure. So Vic is always one of our favorite people. Have people haven't seen his the work that he did for TMBS, the Illicit Histories, you should really check those out. Some of those are just amazing. But we since we've done this thing, kind of since the very beginning of the show last summer, where at the end of the episode, we're kind of done talking about politics for the most part. Might take a few super chat questions at the end. And have pour a glass of whiskey, and I talked to David Griscom about music, and Griscom is on vacation, I think, for another week or so after this one, but which means I'm very happy to have Vic here since long before we talked about doing this substitute segment while Griscom was gone. I always really enjoyed his tweets about music. So what are we talking about this week?
Yeah, so I was thinking this week we could do Pink Floyd. I mean, for no other reason than I was just listening to, Have a Cigar or something the other day and was like, oh, we should do that for the next segment.
Nice. That's that's from a pretty late album, right? That's
Wish You Were Here.
Yeah, Wish You Were Here, right, with the Shine On You Crazy Diamonds, that one.
Yeah, bookending it. And then I think it's that one, and then the title track, and then Welcome to the Machine. I'm not actually, I have no idea what the track listing is now that I'm thinking about it, but that's a good one. That's a good later one. I don't really know the Syd Barrett stuff that well, all the early stuff. I'm mostly, I know the key tracks from those, and we'll listen to them every once in a while, but I've been like revisiting Pink Floyd a lot over just quarantine and all this shit. So can we curse on the stream?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Are you into Floyd?
What's that?
You're into Pink Floyd?
Oh yeah, very much so. I was just So we're late enough in the we're late enough in the episode. What are the chances that anybody who's a current or future employer is going to be listening at this point? So I'll say that, like, as you're talking about the Have a Cigar and that album, that album it's on, Wish You Were Here, I was thinking about the several years ago with other people who are not one of whom is somebody who the viewers know but I won't name. I was getting ready to leave the city that I've been living in for a long time, and I was over at a friend's house, and we took mushrooms and just sat there for the afternoon, and there was a point he had the Apple TV that was set up so his photo stream from Facebook was going across the TV, and I had listening to Shine On You Crazy Diamonds while nice. of everybody we knew were like, were going past us. It's like it's cheesy as hell. That definitely impressed itself on my memory.
No, totally. That kind of thing always makes a really strong impression. I think I remember, the one time I did college, like at some point during it, someone was like, got to put on, it's like Dark Side of the Moon or something. So that was like, yeah, I mean, I always forget that this is like also a whiskey thing. So I always forget to bring a drink over here with me. But yeah, I mean, that one's good. Dark Side of the Moon, like I think front to back, I think still is really great. Still like totally, they also like, they are underrated as a band that like can groove and jam, and like really like rhythmically it hits, their stuff. Like it's not all, some of it is super space. Even when it gets super spacey, it still has that kind of bluesy undertone going on with like David Gilmour stuff. His solo stuff is actually pretty good too. I was checking out a record a self-titled record he did like the end of the 70s, kind of when Roger Waters like was doing more of the songwriting during The Wall. I think it came out like right before The Wall. And it was like, oh, these are all the things that he probably wanted to recommend for that album, but couldn't, yeah, so those are good. I mean, yeah, I think they're underrated as like a bluesy kind of band, because that really helps the spacier stuff work.
Yeah, people appreciate the psychedelic lyrics and the sort of existential musing, but the underlying the underlying musicality maybe gets a little bit of a short shrift.
Yeah, because even like I don't know, not to like, there's other bands of that era that I think like didn't really have that, and their stuff hasn't aged as well. Like I don't know, like Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, like that stuff is like pure. I mean, no disrespect if there are big fans, and each of those bands has their jams, but I don't know. I just think that like Pink Floyd was just musically consistent and kind of in a way where it's like, oh, you could see them playing this like in a big arena to a bunch of really drugged out people, or like in a bar and to a bunch of drunk people. Like I think some of the other bands of that era like got a lot of I don't know, they were missing. I think that's what has kind of made their stuff what's the word, kind of just kind of remain relevant,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, you said you didn't know the Syd Barrett stuff as much, but you're a big fan of the when the Roger Waters era, which is certainly I mean I'm pretty much the same way. I think that the like I think Dark Side of the Moon was big for me for I mean, whatever. I mean, obviously, I still love that album, but, for a long time, and often, because of, those like sort of, existential, musings and in the lyrics, like I have, I mean, I have to admit, like this is probably even more cheesy than the first thing, but like that. Like that track Time, from of Dark Side of the Moon. Like I remember totally. I remember like the week leading up to when I turned 30, like just listening to that constantly, like that's like,
nice,
because
I think when you're like 15 too and you first hear that, it's like the deepest thing ever,
Yeah.
But that's another one too, where it has those lyrics, but like the underlying kind of drums and guitar lines that's going underneath it is like actually pretty groovy, and it's like a blues song, at its core, which is fun. I think the other album that gets overlooked a lot is Animals, but that one actually is great. I mean, what it is all the really great tracks on it are like literally 17 minutes long, so it's like hard to like recommend that to someone or to like ever hear that on radio, but like that album is banger too.
Right, and this goes back to your first point about the underlying bluesiness and all of that, because they do these I mean, what you might like, the sort of go-to thing that you think of when you think of Pink Floyd might be like, I don't know, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 or something, which is, fucking amazing. Don't get me, but like it's, it's also very like digestible. Whereas they'd also do these things where it's like, no, you're just going to listen to 10 minutes of moody music before we actually
Right.
get to the singing.
Right. I mean, that's one too, where like they start to get like real, like kind of anti-capitalist in the lyrics. So that's a lot of fun too. That was like one of those as a teenager being like, oh, interesting,
Yeah.
With like
I mean,
some of the different.
Waters seems to have pretty good politics as far as I can tell.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, he's super, pro-Palestine. He's kind of has like all the good opinions he was very big on the Julian Assange case. So, I mean, unless you're a certain type of liberal, I think his politics are pretty good. Yeah. I mean, The Wall, I think in that regard too, like holds up well, like politically and kind of what's going on. Cause it's like, you listen to it now and it's like, oh, this is like it's about like a rock star, but it totally is just about like a despot politician too. I mean, the movie, it talks about.
Yeah, the movie really plays that up, but it's about the, I mean, obviously it's about this like kind of very like scary, intimate view of like one person's, psychology and how, schools and, and his mother and, and all of the things that can conspire to fuck someone up, did it. But then there is also this political upshot at the end, that it's like, oh, this is how fascism happens.
Right.
And I should say it's also the only, I think that there are not a lot of like rock movies that way that like really hold up, right? Like I think most movies like that are sort of like, okay, maybe if you're really into that band, or it's like a sort of interest in historical curiosity that like,
totally. No, it still holds up. Yeah. Like when you watch like Tommy, the movie, that's very like, oh, I'm just watching this because it's fun and it's The Who and it's of its time. But yeah, The Wall, like you can actually sit and appreciate and watch it. It still is, everything kind of still holds,
and I mean, and whatever. I mean, like there's obviously great stuff on the album,
of course.
I'm not about singing along to Pinball Wizard loudly and out of tune, but just as a movie, it's just not, that interesting, whereas like, The Wall, I mean, The Wall, like, holds up really well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny too, like they had that angle, and I know this is the music side and not, but it's what we talk about. So it's going to creep in here. But I remember reading like a biography about them when I was in high school. I think it was called like Saucer Full of Secrets or something like that. And they had a section in it where they talk about being like an up and coming band. And they mention how like, since most of them grew up like pretty well off, I think one of them was working class. I think the keyboardist, but a lot of their contemporary bands that they were friends with, like they were saying their friends like couldn't experiment as much because they were like concerned about getting gigs, and like they kind of stuck to like blues bar rock music because that's the gigs that everyone needed to get, and they at the had felt like, oh wow, like we have the flexibility to like really play around because we don't really care about we're not living gig to gig like our friends are. So like it was interesting kind of reading that as a young Padawan and kind of in taking like, oh okay, that does matter, like like, oh, having money like makes you more able to like experiment creatively and stuff, and not having to worry about those things is pretty nice. It's funny how like, and that was like an explicit like chunk of a chapter or something. And yeah, so I was thinking about that, like just in terms of like their music and their view and kind of what they brought into it later, like, and they kind of come back around, right? And then that's I mean with Waters, right? But then kind of talking about all that stuff and their own kind of political position, they kind of, I feel like, are making a conscious effort later, right? To be like, okay, we've kind of ridden the fucking capitalism money train, right? And like clearly they hate it because that's what Have a Cigar is about. And then they kind of, with the rest of their stuff, it's like, yeah, this is all bullshit and fascist. Like rock stars are fascist. That's
the track on Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's when they start like feeling that's them being like, oh, it's weird to like have this much, like we can buy jets and shit. Like, what's that about? Like,
yeah, which kind of reminds me of that. Oh hell, when was that? There's like, anyway, sometime in the early fall, I think, when Yarnbrook from the Ayn Rand Institute came on the show to argue with me, and he was like, and I remember one of his examples was like, why can't somebody have a private plane? You know, why do you want to stand in the way of their dreams? It's like, well, you know, maybe we could, you know, maybe if you're hoarding that much wealth stops other people from achieving their dreams, you know, maybe there's some push and pull there.
Right.
But, yeah.
Right. Well, not even to mention the carbon footprint issue of private planes.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Hey, Forrest.
Hey, it was episode 4.
Episode 4. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
I had to pull up the Ayn Rand was wrong about everything.
Yeah,
Nice
that was
title.
the title of the episode. Ayn Rand was wrong about everything. Which yeah, no, that was a very good early episode. Liked that a lot. You know, actually, I wonder what Yarn Brooks or Rand or Nathaniel Brandon or any of the people in that call, you know, like what they would think of the wall. You know, if they listened to it, you know, it's like well, why? This is a very successful person who's clearly asserted his will onto the world. Why is it all sad?
Right. Well, I'm sure they would let the audience or something, right, in that universe of like, well, they shouldn't have bought his records if they didn't want him to become a
maybe he would have gone a completely different direction if he had discovered Pink Floyd when he was younger.
Right.
There's something super fucking like on top of already being just like disgusting people, like people like that work for like the Ayn Rand Institute, like making a career out, like making an opportunistic career out of that is specifically, I think,
totally
pretty fun.
Yeah, like if you're just a random guy who has these opinions and like you like some of what libertarians say about like you know, weed and, you know, not being homophobic, you know, that's fine. But if you're like, oh, I'm gonna go work for the Ayn Rand Institute,
well, he ran it, I think, at one point, like he was like the president or something.
No,
so
I mean, whatever. I mean, he's clearly a true believer, you know, since which actually, again, you know, not unlike the stuff in, you know, the wall, you know, I mean, I guess you can sort of see the roots of that because he was ranting at one point about how he knows what socialism is like because he grew up in a kibbutz and they couldn't have a TV or something, you know, which is
that means that I know what socialism is like too. I didn't have cable growing up, so
right. Yeah, my mom made me watch PBS, so I know what exactly what Stalin was doing.
Yeah, and the TV example is interesting too because that came up in the Jordan Peterson thing we were watching earlier. He was talking about how Marxists believe that there's a cabal of capitalists who are hoarding all the flat screen TVs in a big warehouse somewhere.
I remember everyone commenting on that part of his answer when the debate dropped. That's why I kept that in there because I let him go on a little bit. I remember being like flat screen TVs, like what the fuck? Like that's your example for?
Well, and it's also weird that they all still use that phrase because it's like I like
right. When was the last time I had a curved screen on a TV?
You're gonna let they're gonna hoard the flat screen TVs.
That's a pretty good impression.
I had to watch every single TMBS episode where Michael did his Jordan Peterson impression.
Right.
You can't like.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, actually, yeah. It's a deep cut. But if you watch the very first time I was ever on YouTube in 2018 was the talk I gave at the Jordan Peterson conference in Idaho since Peterson, Peterson had been scheduled to go on Doug Lane's podcast Zero Squared, and then who knows, maybe it was him, maybe it was somebody who worked for him, but Team Peterson canceled the appearance. Like they realized, that they'd be walking into enemy territory, and so they canceled the appearance. And then like a week later, Peterson was on Joe Rogan, and Rogan asked him, "Why do you never debate one of these equality of outcome Marxists you're always talking about?" And he said, "Well, they don't want to debate me." And Doug got so pissed about that he reached out to this group or I don't know, somehow or another he made contact with this group in Idaho, and between them they organized this. So Dave Jonathan, I think, is the name of the person in Idaho. they talked to several times. My apologies if I'm getting your name wrong, Dave. But they organized this conference as Jordan Peterson, a conference in lieu of a debate. And so I gave a talk at that conference, and you can hear, like, there's a point where you can hear Michael Brooks in the audience sort of hecklingly interjected something in his Peterson impression.
his best one was Jordan Peterson like selling out, and he was like, ka-ching, ka-ching, and he was I'm selling out. I'm getting all this money. Can we watch the Cider of Doom?
Yeah. Let's
yeah. I was thinking of that one.
Okay, let's watch Cider of Doom, and then let's wrap up.
Okay.
Well, I have a negative story.
Okay.
Okay. One of the things that both Michaela and I noticed was that when we restricted our diet and then ate something we weren't supposed to, the reaction to eating what we weren't supposed to was absolutely catastrophic.
What did you do? What did you switch to? Or what did you eat, rather?
Well, the worst response, I think we're allergic to, or allergic, whatever the hell this is, having an inflammatory response to something called sulfites. And we had some apple cider that had sulfites in it. And that was really not good. Like, I was done for a month. That was the first time I talked to Sam Harris.
You were done for a month?
Oh, yeah. It took me out for a month. It was awful.
Really?
Yeah. So I would say,
so,
look.
So this is right before this whole truth conversation with Sam Harris that got stuck in the mud. During.
So I think the day I told.
Before we finish this up, I do want to point out that an awesome part of this clip that I didn't even realize till we just watched it is that part of his apocalyptic story about how he's fucked up by the cider is him trying to justify why he did so badly in that debate with Harris.
I like when he says he's like the day I first talked to Sam Harris was the worst day of my life. And then he has to like clarify, and he's like, "Oh, not because I had to talk to him, but no, it's like I can imagine how that could be the worst day of your life." Like,
yeah, well, sure. I mean, talking to Sam Harris should be the worst day of anybody's life, but it's also if you listen to that, I mean, I have to say, like, I've never like been more sympathetic to Sam Harris than listening to him talking to Jordan Peterson, you know, for that like hour and a half or however long that first conversation was. Because they're arguing about truth and whether something, you know, being like having pragmatic utility means that it's true, or like it can be true even if it doesn't. And like Harris believes all kinds of vile bullshit, but like in that conversation, he sounds like a long-suffering, like underpaid adjunct philosophy professor trying to explain something super simple to the world's most confused undergraduate.
Well, it was the cider withdrawal.
Yeah, it was the cider. It wasn't him. It was the cider. Exactly.
Have you ever heard there's like a podcast that Joe Rogan was recording with like a really, really drunk Hannibal Buress, and he comes in and he starts heckling Sam Harris for an hour.
I have not, but that's hilarious. I can imagine that. I've actually seen Buress do stand up in person. So I think I have a pretty good idea of what that might be like. But anyway, I'm sorry. Let's finish up the clip.
Talk to Sam was like the worst day of my life, not because of talking to Sam, but it was
just physical.
Oh Jesus, I was so dead, but I didn't want to not do it.
Apple cider, like what was it doing?
Sulfites in it.
What was it doing to you?
Oh, it produced an overwhelming sense of impending doom. And I seriously been overwhelming. Like, there's no way I could have lived like that if that would have lasted for. See, Michaela knew by that point that it would probably only last a month, and I was like,
a month?
Yeah,
from
a month.
Fucking cider.
Oh, I didn't sleep that month. I didn't sleep for 25 days. I didn't sleep
What?
at all. I didn't sleep at all for 25 days.
How is that possible? That
I'll tell you how it's possible. You lay in bed, frozen in something approximating terror for 8 hours, and then you get up.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, not
and
good.
this is from fucking cider. From cider.
That's what we thought. Yeah. I mean, look, again, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
Awesome. That's amazing.
I love the way this one was cut.
Yeah.
I gotta find out who did it really quick.
Yeah.
So I can shout them out. Was Critical Thoughts on YouTube. It's the name of the channel.
Oh yeah. No, I mean you wonder too, like serious question, what's going on in that clip? Like, because what I can think of is either, I mean, look, there's no way in hell, like, Cider didn't do what he's describing, right? Like, that didn't happen. So either he's just making it up, like he wants like some crazy lie to explain like that conversation with Harris. It just kind of gets out of control and he realizes he's exaggerated too much and he can't walk it back, or something other than Cider was doing all that, because that
Well, there's multiple things going on, because his daughter was launching her didn't go to school for it, but somehow is a nutrition expert career. So out of that carnivore diet thing and the allergy stories, his daughter launched her like YouTube whatever nutritionist thing, where she charges people like $70 a session or something to teach them about nutrition. So that's one thing going on. The other thing probably is the Sam Harris debate thing, where he's kind of justifying it. And, you know, at the same time, I mean, you know, people really do have these problems where they can't diagnose it for a really long time and they just kind of assume it's something. So I've had family members going through something like that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it could be something weird that he just doesn't know what it is. And he's, you know, because he's Jordan Peterson, he makes weird connections. You jump to the cider, you know, it's like
it also sounds like a benzo withdrawal thing. It does.
Yeah,
well, that's what I was gonna say, because that sounds a lot more like drug withdrawal than apple cider.
It can't be the pills. It's got to be the cider.
I also love how in that clip he's very careful to like qualify towards the end. Like I have no idea. He literally says I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, right. Because he realized it. Like, because that's okay. So like that's the most charitable assumption, that like something else, withdrawal, or something else was going on, and he just sincerely believed it was the spider, because he's like making one of these like connections that people make, like people like with autistic children who think that like you know, power lines made them autistic or whatever, you know, that like he's making some, you know, insane connection on that level, or he doesn't want to admit that it's withdrawal. So he goes to cider, or he's just making it up for some other reason.
I mean, I think it's probably, you know, a little bit of all of them. An interesting thing about that video that we watched earlier, where he's returning and he admits the benzo withdrawal thing, is he says, and I mean, I guess this is a hallmark of, you know, a lot of people that go through addictions that are like in professional careers where they should know better, but he's like, oh, like I never thought that it would be this addictive, like, but he's like a clinical psychologist, right. Like any normal, like any regular person that gets like a really bad addiction to anti-anxiety medications and then goes, listen, the doctor prescribed it, I didn't know it was going to be this addictive. I'd be like, yeah, like that can creep up on you. Like prescription pills can creep up on you as a problem. But for somebody who spent his entire career supposedly studying the human brain and like what all of these, like what chemicals do, and like in an attempt to try to like get people out of addictions, like really, like you want to admit that you don't, that, you know what I mean? Like that you don't know that it could be that addictive. Like it's one of the most addictive classes of drugs that exists anywhere.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that is a really weird thing, just in terms of professional competence. Like, you know, that he'd say he doesn't know that it'd be that addictive. And I mean, like this also does bring up a whole other thing with Peterson, because look, I'm sure, because people will point this out sometimes, like it's not that I doubt that he has helped people, you know, with problems like that. I'm certain that he has. You know, but okay, one, you know, he's using whatever goodwill he's accumulated that way to spread a lot of, you know, much of really damaging, you know, ideas. And two, look, there are some people who are at a place in their lives where what they need is this sort of pseudo father figure to yell at them about cleaning their room and not making excuses. And, you know, I'm sure he provides that. But there are lots of other people who it might be the worst possible thing for them to encounter somebody who's just telling them that, like, oh, their drug problem is just a matter of bad moral character and it's all fault, and, you know, like that might actually like, you know, like especially people who really just need some like, you know, medical and financial intervention, you know, to help stabilize them and get them on their feet, that like that could actually be disastrous for them.
And he seems to have real contempt in his voice when he talks about, you know, whether it's the patients that he used to have that were struggling through addictions and homelessness. Like he seems to, and it comes up again in like another one of the clips, like in a bunch of the clips that we watched and like that I watched putting this together. Like he talks about these patients with like real contempt in his voice, and like struggling people with real contempt in his voice. You know what I mean? Like for him, it's a weakness. It's not like it's a weakness that forces, which is like the conservative mentality, like it is. But like at the same time, like you think if someone was putting their life's work into being a psychologist and who, you know, was constantly saying, oh, well, life is struggle, like they'd have a little bit more respect, or at least some warm feelings or like understanding or compassion towards struggling people that he seems to completely.
Okay, not to get off on a whole other thing is exactly why it bothers me so much when people who think that they're leftists start sounding like that, you know, when they're like obsessed with, you know, they're obsessed with like, you know, talking about accountability and consequences and, you know, basically going after people for individually being bad people. It's like, guys, you're missing the whole point. But
it's kind of funny that during that, when we were, I messaged you this, but during it, when he says, oh, people shouldn't be allowed to, like Peterson says, people shouldn't be allowed to, you know, extol the virtues of socialism in polite society. That is the definition of canceling somebody. You know what I mean? Like you're taken out of polite society. Like maybe there aren't, you know, economic or financial consequences every time, but like you're like the things you say in this person's opinion are so beyond the pale that you can suddenly not, you know, make those thoughts in society.
Exactly. Right. So obviously Peterson, like all right wingers, is a hilariously hypocritical and shit like this. No surprise there. You know, but look, I don't want to, I'm not interested in, I mean, obviously we're having a little fun with the stuff that's funny about Peterson, of which there's a lot, you know, but I mean, I'm not interested in criticizing Peterson to like, you know, in order to hate on him as an individual or to, you know, revel in his misfortunes or anything like that. In fact, I got in trouble a couple of years ago for saying that I felt bad for him, you know, because what he was going through with his drug problem. That's not the point at all. The point is that, like, you know, the ideas that he's spreading are an impediment to creating a better society. Speaking of which, Last Poor Yorick, thank you so much, brother, for the super chat. Says, dear Agony Ben, my brother is a political philosophy prof, good Rawlsian, but refuses to read or engage with Marx. How can we save his soul from capital? So if he's a big fan of John Rawls, my advice would be to get him to read a very late book that Rawls wrote called Justice is Fairness or Restatement. So Rawls's thing, you know, real quick version for people who aren't familiar with this, what Rawls is best known for is this thought experiment called the Veil of Ignorance that says a just society is a society that you design if you simplify a little bit, but you know, if you knew you had to live in it, but you didn't know who you were going to be, you didn't know if you were going to be black or white, male or female, born into a rich family or a poor family. And a lot of people thought that this was consistent with, like, you know, maybe capitalism plus a welfare state. But in this book, Justice is Fairness Restatement, one of his last books, he actually reverses, you know, he actually like explicitly says, no, it can't be. In order to realize this vision of justice, you would need some form of democratic socialism. And so in that book, he seems to have absorbed a lot of his critiques. So, you know, read that. So yeah, I want to, it is about 11:15. To 11. We've been going for a little over 3 hours. So
we wanted to get out of here at 10.
I do want to get out of here at 10, but we were, you know, the Peterson discussion was so good. We went a little over time. We'll strive to be more disciplined about the time in the future. But thank you so much, Vic. I believe Griscom is still gone next week. You want to do another one of these next week?
Next week. Let me get back to you tomorrow.
Yeah. We'll get your schedule figured out, but I'm sure we will do another one at some point in the future.
For sure. Yeah.
Really appreciate you coming on, doing this segment. As far as other stuff that we should plug that's coming up real quick in the future, I should say that on Wednesday, Forrest and I and Ryan Lake and Jacobin Deputy Mike Utrecht and Zero Books editor Doug Lane are going to be streaming at 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 Pacific. Talk about the movie Scanner Darkly for our Wednesday movie segment. Which
I'm listening to the audiobook right now because I liked the movie, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get engaged with it.
Yeah, the book's really good, and it's like one of the only. It's actually the only example I can think of a movie based on a Philip K. Dick novel that actually feels like the novel, like has like the dark humor and kind of the rhythms of the original.
Yeah, the movie was really good. Richard Linklater is always really good as a director.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So on Thursday, for the episode drop-in for patrons is a beginner's guide to Kant with Matt McManus, Russ Sabriglia, and Ryan Lake. Mandatory reminder, if you want to, we'll obviously do a public preview, but if you want to watch or listen to that whole episode or any of the other Thursday episodes, then become a patron. Mandatory joke for the monthly cost of a milkshake at a 50s nostalgia diner in 1994. You get those bonus episodes every single Thursday. You also get access to the Discord. You also get regularly scheduled, at least once a month, Discord office hour super chats. And I think we're also going to start doing the Discord movie viewings about once a month. So the one we did about Judas and the Black Messiah, when we watched Judas and the Black Messiah patrons, that was a lot of fun, and it was a good discussion after. So don't know what we'll do next, but we will keep doing those. Other good stuff.
I wanted to talk to Jason and see if he wanted to do something about Nomadland.
Yeah. That's interesting.
He's watching it with Leisha, and then they're doing like a commentary on it or something. So I was wondering if I don't know. He was talking about it last night, so I was like, I enjoyed that movie, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. So
fair enough. Then on Friday, the second Philosophy Friday live stream with Jennifer Burgess, going to talk about the trolley problem. And on Sunday, we do the Sunday night debate breakdowns. We're going to do something a little bit different this time. I am not going to be there, but Ryan Lake and Mark Warren, who are Sunday debate breakdown regulars, are going to watch and comment on the debate that I did with Doug Wilson. So should be fun. Watch them. Roast me a little, maybe as is merited. But in any case, all good stuff coming up. And then Thaddeus Russell is going to be on the show on Monday. So thank you everybody who watched this long. Yes, I agree. Somebody in the chat says, if we ever meet Jason's dad, I'll be gravely disappointed. He's the things that when Jason Miles has been on the movie or live streams, the things that he said about his dad, like watching movies with his dad, have been hilarious. And
then his dad called him, and he didn't answer it live on stream.
Yeah, I really want him to do that next time to answer on speakerphone so we can all talk to him. But thank you, Vic. Thank you as always, Forrest. Everybody watched. Left is best.